All right, here we go. All right, still always a little odd to get used to speaking on webinars. I'm going to, my favorite way of speaking is when this happened kind of spontaneously at OMG Live a couple times when there's, kind of a circle of people kind of develops. And so we'll kind of imagine that we're doing that to the best that we can, especially me, I suppose, since this is somewhat of a one-way conversation, but we'll have some feedback, of course. All right, it begins. Welcome to the first day of the next part of your life, we could say. Here's, and I'll explain why I call this alchemy and give you a sense of some of the takeaways from this webinar and then what we'll look to build together here. All right, so what we're going to want to be doing here, let me make sure this isn't too high of a gain. Oh, it should be okay. What we are going to want to do what we're going to do together is pretty cool. We're going to look to build something in parallel to your current life and mental model of the world and so forth that will purely benefit you, and that doesn't need to be threatening or a problem or get in your way or anything like that. We're going to be taking a look at things having to do with foundations, including of your like model for the world and so forth. So it's very nice and useful to think of it that way in terms of building it in parallel. You are going to be able to live your life just fine with your, the way things are currently going. They're not going to go worse, right? So however great your life is right now or however problems you have, that will continue or only get better. If we imagine that you had a little guardian angel who just kind of intervened in your life from time to time and just made your life better, then that's, in a sense, not an actual angel, of course, but we're going to build an understanding, and you're going to continue to build it, and it's going to keep on mixing with your life and making your life easier and better and turning things more and more to gold. So that's the kind of the background model, mental model that we're looking at here. Okay, I'm actually going to stop showing the screen. No, that's good. Let me show my screen cam as well here. If I can find where, here, webcam, and share my webcam. Spinning. All right, here we go. All right, guys. How do you like that, huh? Woo. Okay. Hopefully everything's visible. Is that including the words? Let me pop into the Facebook group here. I think people like the intro song. Great. It's a little hard to read some of the words. Let me see what we can do here. There's that. So I probably can't move this around, right? It doesn't move when I move it. See if I can. All right. So let's see what people are saying. So it's getting in the way of the words, right? Let's see if I can. It looks good here, huh? Let's see. So this doesn't move around, does it? If I move the camera around, it doesn't move for you, right? Probably only moves for me. Or does it move for you? It doesn't move around. Is it like in the bottom right corner, or is it somewhere else? Left side, okay. All right, so then and it's maybe covering a little bit of the words. Let me slide it like this. And if I hide my little interface here, okay, and then I can see it. So that should work pretty well, right? Is that working? How's it working out now? Can you see what's on my the whole slide generally? Good. Okay, wonderful. Rock and roll. This is our little bit of growing pains here, but good. All right, super. Should I look at myself? Let me see. That might be a little freaky. I better hide that from myself so I'm not like staring at myself talk. Although maybe I would feel like a little bit of live company if that was the case. All right, so great. So that's what we're going to build in parallel. It's kind of a beautiful and exciting idea, and it's very real. I have been, you might have seen me. I was going to say heard me right or read me right. I've been working actually for hours a day for the last few months specifically because I planned on doing something for you guys this summer. And what I'm actually going to do is I'll be doing Monday webinars, May and June. May is almost over, but I guess we'll probably have 2 Mondays, right, in May, and then in June. And then I'm going to actually do 2 webinars a week for about roughly 4 months after that. And that's going to be included in people that are in the Director's Cut program or Project Assimilation, basically anyone who has the live webinars. And then people outside of that will be able to purchase that. So that's basically how it works. But regardless, even people that don't will get 6 webinars, but it's not going to be too bad. So that is kind of how I'm going to structure it. And because it's going to be available to people outside of NHB too once I start that, because this is really me getting a start helping people understand law of implication, you could say, but really how things work. And the whole reason that at this point in my life, I pretty much have everything I want and need and so forth, including my retirement taken care of and all that, and I'm happily married and so forth. So really it's about trying to win, right? I'm here to win. And for me, winning means that the world is basically perfect, or whatever that might look like. We all want to make some kind of difference in some amount of the world, either just our own or certainly the people that we care about typically, right? We want to make life better. Every time we make a decision, we're trying to make life better, right, for some number of people. And one day I realized that I didn't know for sure that I was helpless. I didn't know for sure. As a matter of fact, it made sense that the world would be rigged, that any one person could somehow build to the point where the world could be transformed into something way better and different and so forth. So given that I didn't know I couldn't do that, and then I'll just say when Clinton got reelected back in, must have been around, was it 96, I believe that was. And then that was around when I, by one measure, reached the top of the world in magic. And I thought, look, I'm used to cartoons or movies where the good guy wins and so forth. But at that same time, there was a libertarian running who had written a terrific book about just building everything based on the idea of property rights and so forth. And he, of course, got like, 1% of the vote or so. So it was a real shock, not a shock, but just the idea that someone like that would get reelected in a country with 300 million people. And there's other indications too, but I thought, look, someone needs to try and do something because it's not happening all by itself. It's not like the Transformers where the Autobots automatically win by the end of the cartoon. So I started working on things, and I'd already been working on the idea of God's existence. I had a sense of how to solve that issue, and when I did figure out how to know for sure that God existed, then it was also interesting to see that there isn't like a place you can go just to kind of get people to know about that. And interestingly enough, when I talked to like pastors and so forth, they would just think that it would confuse their congregation and so forth. So I also noticed on kind of a simpler level, like when I taught speed reading, right? That's what I did for 10 years after college. I had a course in accelerated learning, including speed reading, and I would sometimes talk to people a little bit like if you talk to people about OMG or something, right? Then it's not exactly that they'll be skeptical, but they would basically feel just as qualified sometimes or often to comment on whether they thought that it was possible to read faster than I was qualified. And it's not about being smarter in general. It's just that if you do something with your life and you're focused on it, and then someone who has really no experience or knowledge about something, and so I realized there's something kind of weird about how we all think. And it wasn't that it made me feel superior. It was that I figure we all have a similar brain. And there's these constant mistakes that I see people making and kind of suffering from. And I was trying to figure out how that all worked, and I had an accelerated learning background, and there was other things. I was quite interested in the topic of evolution and how it related to other theories. And they all kind of came together in the perfect storm over time. And it all came together for me, maybe starting especially about maybe 15 or it's hard to know when to measure. I've had a series of breakthroughs, but that's when I came to Mike and I said, all right, pick something and we can crush it and so forth. That was more like 15 years ago or more that I said that. Okay, so a little bit of musing there. But let's go on to the next slide here. Stay a little focused. All right. This is, I'm going to say something that isn't necessarily going to be some kind of hashtag mind blown this moment or not, but it's kind of a building block for building blocks. And over time, what I'm saying here is going to be quite earth-shattering and really an answer that took me forever. I mean, to figure this kind of thing out, because what it is there's so many things that we assume are correct that we're so surrounded, and there's such deep assumptions that it's really hard to break out of them. And so I probably went decades not fully realizing this. I had some sense of it, but I didn't really realize. Let me make a statement. It's not written here. There's actually first, let me make a quick metaphor. We might think that like seeing red might drive a boar or a bull into kind of a frenzy, right? So that like the idea is that red would cause the bull to go crazy, so that a color would do that. In reality, the conscious experience of seeing red, like red doesn't cause that. Some other neurosignal from light waves and being processed by the eyes and the optical nerves and so forth in a bull would do that. And at the same time, we might look at that and see red, but it isn't the redness. It isn't like the conscious experience of red that's causing anything. A little bit like if you were to make a screensaver of a guy hitting a ball with a baseball bat and it's on a screensaver, then it's not actually the case that the ball hits the bat and the force of the bat makes the ball, go move, right, and go in like a fly arc, right? It's all programmed in, right, to pixels and so forth, and the code is kind of causing all the actual force of the ball hitting the bat doesn't do anything. It's just something we kind of impose onto it when we look at it, if that's what it's programmed on. So at a deep level, and I'm going to say this, and then we'll build on it over time, but ultimately it'll be earth-shattering. This, I'm saying it now because it relates to the name of this series, which I call Alchemy. The world in your life and the results in your life, they don't come from force and forces. Forces don't do anything. They don't exist in that way, just like red doesn't actually cause a bull to get upset. Right? Certain neurosignals and so forth might be closer to the answer. And then there's wavelengths of light that might lead to those neurosignals or the bull's eye and so forth. But red itself is just something that is like a conscious experience. It's not the cause. And it doesn't really, when we think of color, we even understand, even though it kind of feels like it exists out there in the world, we understand that it really doesn't, right? Scientifically, we understand that green doesn't like reside in the tree, right, or in the leaves, but that it's kind of created somehow in our mind, or however you want to think of it. I have a better understanding than that, but just to be simple for a moment. So, on a somewhat practical level here, I'm going to touch on this and then move along. But it'll, as I said, I'll come back to it, and it'll be very important. There's no real such thing. A good way to see this practically has to do with interacting with people, which you're doing constantly when you're looking to make money, and everything else, most everything else in your life. You're either interacting with your own mind or other people's minds. And the model of being able to push or use force, or even including motion. Motion doesn't actually exist in the sense of you're traveling towards a goal or you're even walking along the street. Fundamentally, what's going on is mixing. And if you were to program a video game, then you would see this in a certain way, because if you were to make a video game, or if you were to just make that screensaver with a person hitting a ball with a bat, then there wouldn't be any actual forces. You would be simulating them by mixing the current configuration, right, of the pixels with some sort of physics engine or if-then statements. Right? I'm not a programmer, but it has to logically be something along these lines of what happens next, right? So you're mixing the current configuration with a set of instructions, right? And there's no actual force involved. There's no actual motion even. There's no ball that's moving. It can seem like that when you're looking at it, But in actual case, there's just pixels that are lighting up, and then different pixels are lighting up. And the whole world is actually like that, including when you're dealing with people and when you're thinking about a business plan and when you're thinking about how to rank a website or how to get a client. Then fundamentally, if you, or the more that you start to think in terms of mixing what with what, where you're mixing concepts, or your personality and your current thinking and your memories and so forth are interacting with the environment and then with that person's mind, and they're mixing. And then you can think, if I want this person to become my client, then that person is how they are. The environment that they're in can be variable. If I catch them at a more optimal time or at a more optimal place, then when that person mixes with that different type of place, then the reaction could be different, right? Often when we don't think in terms of mixing, we easily forget that people's responses are they tend to be much more of a product of both the environment and even the reasons that people have for doing things and that you have for doing things. Psychologists have now done tests and studies, and it's hilarious. I actually want to read you a couple things in a book I have right here that I'll share in a moment. So, and then with yourself as well, then you're mixing a number of things from yourself, your understanding, and also your mindset is something that mixes. The law of implication and the stuff that I'm teaching here in Alchemy, it isn't mindset, it's deeper. Mindset is one type of thing that you can build in this new parallel understanding of the world that you're going to build. Now, the other thing about this parallel understanding of the world and how it works that you can build, normally what you're used to is your understanding of the world and also your self-image. One of the takeaways that we'll have over time is I want you to have a very different relationship with your self-image, where you're starting to build things about your understanding of yourself that aren't subject to feedback in a way that is a real problem for people. So anyway, the way that people normally have their self-image, it mixes with the world, right, and creates results for you. That's this. That's why you want basically a positive self-image, right? But the way that people have their self-image structured, the world mixes with it and changes it as well, right? It's subject to feedback, and because of that, then you end up being defensive and needing to defend your self-image against certain types of feedback, and that is actually quite exhausting. And you also try to give yourself and self-image certain types of feedback, which also can be expensive and exhausting. And you're constantly trying to defend and build up a self-image that's being affected or potentially affected by feedback. And it takes so much of your resources, and that's all actually counterproductive and unnecessary. So one of the huge takeaways that you'll get at some point as we continue today and in subsequent days is a very different understanding of your self-image that will be very differently grounded and foundational, and actually not subject to feedback in a way that's going to be so resource intensive and exhausting. And there can be aspects of it that are not subject to feedback at all, and they're also correct. Right? In order for something not to be subject to feedback and not to be defensive, you have to have a way to get it right. You can't just declare that it's correct. So what I wrote here on this screen is that the answer to everything, every situation and so forth, and I'm going to be explaining this from different angles and continually, but I have to start somewhere. The answer to everything is to build and to create. Even on kind of a simple level, by me giving you this statement, it's going to help you just practically. Each and every time now that you find yourself in a situation where you feel a little bit either dejected or low on energy, or maybe you're high on energy and feel good, but you have a problem and you're really not sure how to go about solving it, then even though this might be a bit of a rudimentary understanding at this point, still if you seek to create, even if you take out a notebook and you start writing about how you might go about solving the issue. And I'll actually the next slide will help with that even further. But let me finish reading this. But creation and creativity is generally misunderstood, right? So, and it took me a long, long time to really try to get it to my understanding now, and I'm still working on stuff. I just, at some point, I want to work with you and help you and talk to you. So that's why we're doing this now. I don't know everything, obviously, and there's a bunch of questions that I wish I had already answered that I haven't yet. But what I do know is pretty staggering at this point. Okay, let's go to this next slide. Oh, and by the way, I'll talk for a while and then we'll get a bit of a discussion, both with the Facebook group, and then we'll kind of take it from there and kind of see. I could bring someone live if it makes sense and so forth. Okay, let me ask you this, and again, we're not going to close the door on this. We're not going to finish creating, but the next thing I'm going to talk about after I work on this is even starting in the next slide, is an idea of foundations and thinking in a certain way that's foundational and building a foundation. And it's going to be shockingly counterintuitive. Or if it's not, then you don't understand it well enough yet what I'm trying to say, because a big part of what I'm going to be showing you about thinking foundationally is embracing and understanding how counterintuitive it is as you start out. All right, so suppose we either have a problem that we're trying to solve, or we feel a little bit more powerless than usual. Maybe we feel stuck or something like that, or maybe it's just a kind of mood that we're feeling. Or again, we feel fine and we're just looking to solve a problem. Conceptually, now I'm asking this question. Conceptually, what happens when we ask what if? So like in your mind, and kind of the mental model in your mind, or the kind of semi-formed pictures that we have in our mind, right? We don't see like in full stereo color, but we can still imagine stuff, right? If I asked you to imagine turning off the computer now and getting a drink, and what kind of drink would you want to get, then, not that I'm trying to suggest that, it's kind of bad subliminal programming there, but then you could picture that to a certain degree, right? And that's kind of just what I mean by picturing stuff. So when we ask what if, so let's suppose you ask yourself, well, what if I tried to rank a website for an affiliate marketing site to go along with whatever else I was doing? And what if I did that successfully? What would that look like? What would a success with that look like that would start to help me? Well, just what I asked. If you were to ask that for yourself, then let me make the point that a space is created because by asking that conceptually, a space is created because just by asking that, there's going to be filled in with some sort of thought, right? So you can think of it like, and I actually did mixing there. I did alchemy. What I mean is I took a concept and I started to modify it, right? A concept of website, affiliate website. What if I, as you, started making a site like that, and then and I had a bit of a success. What would that success look like? And then how would that success potentially help my foundation to lead to more success, even with getting local clients perhaps or whatever? As you ask a question like that yourself, now if you just passively hear me say that, which is okay right now, I'm not criticizing that, but just to draw a contrast, if you just passively hear me say that, no space might be created. But if you can understand the difference. If you ask that, you would call it like asking it for yourself or asking it really or seriously. Then you can ask it in a way where something's going on, right? You're consciously doing something where a certain conceptual space is created and filled with the mixture of those concepts, of that, with the answer to that question. But I'm using the word mixture, right? Because you're in essence mixing and modifying concepts. And when you take something forward in time and ask what would it look like, you are when you move something in time like that and try to see how it would end up, then you ultimately are mixing concepts. And if you've heard me talk about thinking in scenarios, this is an example of that, or another angle on it. So when you do anything like that and a new space is created, it gets filled with an answer. We often identify with our mind instead of who we really are, and we think of us as making the answers, and that's the wrong place to focus. It leads to us rushing. It leads to us just wanting to believe that we already have the answer. It leads to us skipping over the idea of a foundation and not really often even creating. It kind of destroys the creation process before we start when we focus on an answer. What you want to do is focus in a way that causes space to be created conceptually. And then the answer will fill itself in. It's not that it's already found within you. It's not that you already have the answers or not. It's that the world works in such a way that if you create in that way, then you will receive, essentially, right? And one of the takeaways from this whole talk here just today, or maybe the main takeaway, is going to be the idea that you can actually focus on building your foundation in life or in a particular area of life and never stop. And everything else will actually fill itself in a faster, more effective manner doing that. And this is another way of putting, but I think it's really going to help bridge things for you and help you understand, especially again over time as I continue. But this new angle on things, when I've talked about how you can seek and build understanding, and that's all you ever have to do, this is another angle on that. So it's similar to what I've already been saying, but I've been trying to figure out how to get across what I do. Because you wouldn't believe it. Just my life is just gold everywhere I look at this point, and it wasn't always, of course. And I'm pretty mediocre at most everything starting out, except for this type of conceptual thinking. And I had to pretty much figure out everything else from scratch. In essence, I was no good at relationships and no good at making money and so forth. So what you can come to understand in life is that you can literally do nothing but focus on building up your foundation, like your roots. If you imagine a tree, you never need to try to make the leaves grow. You just focus on the foundation, the seed, the roots, tending to maybe the tree in such a way that the environment is one that is conducive to the roots growing, the tree growing. But you don't have to worry about the leaves; they'll grow, and the branches and even the trunk will grow if you focus on the foundation. You can, in one way of thinking about it, you can develop clients and get clients by when you meet people, or when you're talking to potential people that could be clients, or that could just know people that might know people that might have clients, right? Or know, or help you get in a situation that can get you towards clients. If when you deal with people, you just can work on building a foundation rather than see, you can know what the result is relevant. The result that you want, the goal that you have, what you envision, is relevant in the following way. If I want a bunch of leaves, then I understand I need to plant a tree. If I want a bunch of pears, then I need to plant a pear plant or tree or whatever pears grow. Not very agriculturally inclined. Even though I'm looking at a bunch of plants in my backyard that my wife planted, but anyway, strawberries I can tell grow on little plants. So, and if you want strawberries, then you grow those. So that matters, right? You need to know what to plant and what foundation to build for. But then you don't need to do anything to make the strawberries happen except for work on tending to the seed that you planted and, in essence, the foundation and the environment around the foundation. That's it. You never need to do anything else. And I didn't figure that out by metaphor. I didn't just figure that out by staring at my wife's strawberry plants. Right? I'll presumably over time as we continue, you'll understand more and more how this all has to be correct, what I'm saying. I kind of developed it from scratch, in essence. As I say, it takes me a lot of time to do this. But that's it. And when you come to realize that fully, it's incredibly relaxing, and in effect, you'll be so powerful and get such results. In effect, that's you can understand that to be what I did to build OMG, is I just tended to the foundation of it, in essence, and I don't worry about much else. Your body and your words out of your mouth and so forth, excuse me, will do stuff, will fill in the details. Remember I said you're not your brain, you're not your mind, you're not your body. you don't have to worry that you're just going to stare at the wall all day. You're going to do plenty of details that they're going to fill itself in. If you're talking to a person, there's a way though that this perspective works, right? Where, like right now, I'm on a webinar and I'm talking. I did not write out my entire talk ahead of time, right? If I had done that, then it would have made this experience pretty wooden, right? If I'd done that. But the details are happening. I mean, I'm talking right now, right? I tended to the foundation and roots and so forth, and had slides ready and so forth. And I've been for decades tending to the foundation and working on things, right? So I try to increase my understanding and the environment for that understanding and around that understanding. And then the details happen, right? I'm talking right now. Those are details. There's not going to be any problem in your life. You're not going to just not get to whatever you need to get to. Everything will work out. I've been doing this for years, where whether or not I've been doing it perfectly or not, I've understood this and do it pretty consistently. And I just focus on understanding, including with people. If there's something that I would like a person to do, then I don't try to force them. What I do, because there really isn't such a thing as force. All you can do is try to mix bad or mix a kind of blurry blob that you have with a person, and that's what ends up when you try to just use force. You try to maybe mix a bunch of emotion or something. But what I try to do is just understand where their energy naturally is headed, what their preferences naturally are. Now, when we say naturally, there's the person, but the person mixes with their environment, right? So a person is different depending on the influences in their environment. So if you help put different things in the environment for someone, they might react differently. If there's nothing that you can put in their environment except for like pain and anger and yelling at them and nagging them and so forth, for them to do something, then I just really don't bother. There's really nothing that I particularly need in life that I need to be doing that for other people. I just either drop it or find someone else to do it, right? Who doesn't, and that again, it works astonishingly well. I'm just like in a sense, I'm doing the same exact thing that our coaches do in OMG. I do this, I live this, and I have results to prove it. Just like our coaches with SEO and online businesses and so forth. And Cotton with mindset and the things that he shares about how he looks at things and how effective that is for him in making such a profitable SEO business. So I'm also, similarly, I'm talking out of what I do and live and know and out of results that I'm currently in the middle of getting, both in business with making money and in my personal life. And they all kind of go together, right? If you end up with a divorce or something like that in your personal life, it sure as heck impacts your business life and all that. And just having a nice, happy, stable personal environment, and one where you can obviously work and function, and you don't have to constantly be watching your back or having difficult feedback is very helpful for your work as well. And all of that again is foundational, right? It's your environment, and it's when you tend to all of that, then things grow in this excellent way. Okay, more on that, but I'll continue on this track here with the slide. So I was saying, is new space being created? I talked about that. And again, to some degree, this will have some vagueness to it, and we'll need to continue on together. But to a certain degree, I'm trying to both give you correct ideas, which will take some explaining, but also give you something that even in kind of a simplistic or initial understanding of what I'm saying, it should still be fairly helpful to you as you look at it and try to apply it in some cases. If you ever feel like you don't know how to apply it, well, that's good. You have a question, right? You just tend to your foundation of understanding what I'm talking about too. Where people get frustrated with me or with LOI would be when they're doing the exact opposite of what I'm talking about, is when they want to get the result. They're trying to stare and wish the strawberries would grow faster. But the strawberries will grow optimally fast if you plant them in the right place and attend to the environment of the seeds, right? And that sort of thing. So things don't happen slowly in my life, but I also look to not rush them. As I suggested in my success framework videos, certainly when it comes to just basic survival, then you want to have that at a basic level so that your life isn't totally falling apart. If there's issues with survival and basic needs, then you tend to that first. But the interesting thing is, by default, the way our mind works, which is riddled with errors and some major problems, but your mind is actually set up to basically keep you alive and surviving pretty decently by default. But there's all sorts of problems with default thinking that everyone has, including me. So this isn't like where about feeling like you're smarter than someone else and feeling like your default thinking is better than someone else's default thinking. There's default ways that the brain works that you're just going to want to accept and embrace and understand that you, the more we try to believe that we've overcome those things and that our brain doesn't work that way, then that'll probably just not help us, make us arrogant. Instead, we want to build something that's going to work despite that. And again, that'll be in things that I'll talk about. I realize that was a little bit general. Okay. For new mixtures or for zoomed in new clarity. Okay. So you can create space in roughly one of two ways. You can ask these what if questions where you're mixing concepts together and you're adding them together and you're moving them forward through time, like when I talked about the website. Or if you imagine what would happen if you're talking to a client. And then if you listen to my client getting videos, I talked about if when you talk to a client, if you've already worked through in your mind what you would do after a client signs on with you, and you're very clear on that, then that's going to really help you when you're talking to a potential client on the phone or in person or however you're talking to them. How you'll come across will just be much clearer because you are clear. Your brain does not think things through nearly to the extent that people sort of tend to assume or act as if the brain does. So you need to mix that for yourself, right? It's like making any kind of mixture. You think, all right, well, what would I do next after other than jump around and play your favorite song and post an AHP assimilation group or something? Then in addition to that, what would you do next, right, with a client? Then what would you do after that? And what would you do? And you're mixing, just like those pixels on a computer screen. You mix. You think, what would I do next? Or what's the first thing I would do? And then that's the new configuration. Then you imagine the world being like that. You've done that first step. And then you think, all right, well, what would make sense to do after that? And then you'll come up with a result there, right? A new space will be created. There'll be a result. And sometimes the answer might not pop to mind instantly. If that's the case, then what do you do? Do you panic? Do you get frustrated? Do you figure that I led you wrong and what's Dave telling me here? It's not working. No, the same thing as always. There's one fundamental meta strategy in life, and only one. And as you embrace this and understand it, you'll never ever be stuck, ever in life. And then as you come to understand that you won't be stuck, that in and of itself will give you a calm, confident background feeling always, which will help make you more charismatic, will help you deal better with people in every way, deal better with yourself, free up energy for you and everything. So I was saying you don't need to be stuck. If you ask yourself a question and there's no answer immediately pops to mind, then you work on the foundation. You work around it. You work on more roots and well, what do I know? If you don't know what you do next, think, what do I know? And maybe what you do know is that at least you have people to ask in OMG, and maybe you ask them and see what they have to say, and then then you can think if that fits in with what you want, right? So one way or the other, you continue to think it through what might happen next. So that's an example of new mixtures, all right, and a space being created as you ask more questions. The other way, general way to make new space is to zoom in. So this is often particularly counterintuitive. Of course, we all do it sometimes, but basically you're trying to, let's suppose that you're thinking of telling your significant other that you love them. Then you might think, well, okay, so I'm going to say the words, I love you. Well, if I say that, that's going to presuppose that I understand the meaning of I and the meaning of love and the meaning of you. So you're claiming some pretty deep understanding, actually, of yourself, the other person, and love. If you were to circle each of those words and kind of zoom in on them and try to understand them, then you would greatly profit. And I've done that. I understand each of those concepts significantly probably better than people normally do, just because I put the focus in and use the right method. And then when people try to do that, they don't know what to do because the answers don't pop to mind, or an initial answer pops to mind and then they want the answer so badly, then they just decide that must be right? Or they're taking a shower and something occurs to them, like a thought occurs to them, and they're like, oh, okay, that's what it is, yes, right? And it like feels right, and it feels good, and it feels like it fits. But that's just getting excited about an answer. You need to tend to the foundation until you have real good clarity. And those are tough questions. Who am I? Who are other people? And what is love? So you're going to need to build a lot of foundation, possibly, for that answer to really fill itself in properly. But when you understand the only thing to do is to fill in foundation and to build your foundation in your life, then see that the minute you really secretly hope to be done with the annoyance of building understanding, right? The brain by default, people tend to treat seeking understanding as a necessary evil, as an annoyance to get done with as soon as possible, right there. Another way to look at it is people are like in a conceptual box, let's say, or they're in their comfort zone, or they have their understanding, and then, or let's say someone's trying to learn SEO for the first time, and they're not used to the idea of trying to learn something when they don't have a foundation for it or a framework. And so how do people feel? They feel like, damn it, I want to understand what Greg's talking about. I want to understand what is being taught. And damn, I don't have the framework. If at least if they know that, they might just feel perturbed and not know why. If they've at least listened, if they either understand it already or if they listen to my video in the SEO 101 section explaining that about learning and frameworks, then they would have a sense, okay, got it, I need a framework. But then what people want is to get that answer as soon as possible. It's kind of like a necessary evil to get a foothold or a framework. And then they get to the good part of building details and taking action and all that. You will always act at your level of understanding. You don't have to worry about taking action. It's going to happen. You're never going to be tempted, as I say, to just stare at the wall all day. Right? It's not going to happen. But that's just an illustration. My point there is that you can look for this and you can see it all over the place. People, brains by default, treat seeking understanding and working on foundation as an annoyance to get done with as quickly as possible so they can get to the work of getting the answers or getting the results. And the result only matters so you know what seed to plant and what to tend to. And other than that, and again, I live this. This isn't like a theory I had yesterday. I've been working on explaining this to you and understanding it better so I could explain it to you and so I could do it even more consistently myself. But again, I'm speaking from experience and from a theoretical understanding and foundation that's very comprehensive from what I'm talking about here. So this isn't like, again, some theory that might not work for you. As soon as you give your brain the out of you're hoping to get to the fun part where you're just getting results and focusing on doing the leaves or the tree or getting the strawberries, then your brain is going to constantly treat building and tending to a foundation as a necessary evil and try to be done with it, which also means it's not going to do a good job. It's going to use bias, right? I'm blanking on the word. It starts with a C. Confirmation bias. And your brain is just going to basically look for evidence in favor that you already have a foundation. And fundamentally, that's what's going on in your life. Your entire belief system, your whole self-image, and everything that you understand about life is built. And I'm about to say something pretty earth-shattering here that again, over time, as you really understand this, it'll be earth-shattering. I'm not claiming that it'll blow your mind this second, although who knows, it might. But I meant to build up to this, but it's kind of fits in with what I'm saying now, so I'll say it. And remember, parallel track. You can still have the rest of your understanding of life will suit you just fine. You'll still get the results you're going to get or better. Right? This doesn't have to cause you to sit there and pick your navel all day or worry. Don't worry. It's not going to work like that. But your life can only get better with what we're talking about. It's not going to get worse. I say that because I'm hopefully getting soon to where I want you to see with foundations and with this whole topic, basically your brain, all of our brains are overconfident about being overconfident. Like we're defensive about the fact that we're defensive. So we have this kind of second layer of defense that causes people to get stuck permanently. And I was trying to figure out what the heck is making people so stuck. Why are they just never coming to these ideas that I've over time figured out? And it's because essentially we're defensive about being defensive. We're overconfident about how overconfident we are. And now there's all kinds of studies showing that, proving that. And yet the people that do the studies, they still make all kinds of other theoretical mistakes and thinking mistakes about important things in life, like about evolutionary theory. They all tend to believe in evolutionary theory, and their politics tend to be wrong. Okay, so here's the huge thing, or potentially huge as it takes shape for you. You started as an infant, giving away the ball game, but it was okay because you're an infant. It's understandable. Presuming you were helpless, and then looking to survive and make things work and move forward in life anyway. Your understanding of the world and your personality and your beliefs and your skills and everything, your whole model for the world, has been built on top of that. Like if there's an oil well that's capped, right, that's harnessed in a certain way, but it's still there, it's still flowing. Everything is based, and the point is that in this parallel track, we can flip this, we can actually change this, and it's unbelievable as you understand this and change it. This is just unbelievable, just beyond belief what this will do for you. So literally everything about your life is built on the assumption that you're helpless, and of covering that up, and of convincing yourself that you're not. And the way people convince themselves they're not is all sorts of resources. Like, okay, and this is why people's self-image is so important to them, but in a way that's very counterproductive. I've been aware for a long time that the way people treated their self-image was causing them such inefficiency and anguish also, and defensiveness that was, again, inefficient, make them inefficient, ineffective. People are constantly having to, it's like they're running a race and they have to stopping to look in the mirror or something. They could never win a race against someone that's running and not doing that. People are, I would see in business, for example, people are just constantly needing to accomplish defending their self-image while trying to accomplish what else they're supposedly trying to accomplish in business. Same thing when people are in a romantic relationship or their friendship relationships or business relationships, anything. And it's so much effort, and it's such a counterproductive mixture, right, or focus. It gets mixed in with them trying to achieve their goal. That when you build your foundational understanding of how things work and who you are properly, that'll go away. You can't. It won't just go away by trying to cap it, by trying to tend to the leaves. You can't just will yourself to not have ego. Like people say, okay, no ego. It's not about me. It's not about ego. I'm going to drop the ego and just do this. But that's not possible because they're trying to do that at like a leaf level. They're trying to use, again, like direct willpower without understanding. The only possible way you can have an understanding of your self-image so that you can have this incredible boost in efficiency for yourself and just happiness and persuasiveness. People are going to tend to be drawn to you much even better than they might be now. To whatever degree that I come across as charismatic, it's almost entirely from this type of foundational stuff, because naturally I'm not terrible. I'm kind of like a 4 or something. It's so many things, right? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, including like charisma, right? Naturally, but I probably come across as more charismatic than that because of the foundation that I've built and the understanding that I have about self-image and so forth. And you'll have that too, but we can't have it just from a few words or again, direct willpower or resolving to not have ego interfere. All that's going to happen if you resolve to do that is your mind's going to find ways to fool you, to make you believe that your ego's not interfering while it still is. So it's like a whole second task to try to do. Now it's not enough to be dealing with your self-image while you're trying to do everything else. Then you also, and when I say dealing with self-image, right, it's like people trying to rank a website and not feel like they're slow or doing things worse than other people, or that make sure that they feel smart, like reasonably smart at the same time. Then they're trying to get clients while trying not to have their own self-image battered or their self-esteem battered too much by doing it, right? So constantly counterproductive. And then when you're interacting with people, then there's a level of defensiveness that everyone has. We all feel it. We all understand that with anyone we're interacting with, there's some things that we could say where it would just destroy a relationship with them. And what would be those things? Things that really attacked their self-image or would undermine their self-image, even if we didn't mean to. Right? Things like that could destroy or really cause a break or a difficulty in our relationship with somebody. And so we have this intuitive sense, that's correct, that dealing with other people is like a minefield, right? Where we're trying not to set off landmines that they set for themselves and for other people in dealing with them. Some have more than others, but those landmines are there. And we feel it, and we have that for ourselves. But there's a way out of that. But again, it's built by building and by building foundationally an understanding of life. And we're going to need to get to the bottom of it for real in order for you to have that benefit. I have a terrific understanding of that that I'll be able to share with you, and probably by next week I'll have even better understanding. But I have a lot that I can share with you. Not necessarily all today, but we'll keep going. Right, we have more than today. Okay, so that big reveal that over time will be astronomically important for you is the idea that there's the bottom line assumption that you're helpless, and then there's a defense model that's created on top of that where you're not helpless because, and part of it is your self-image, because you're reasonably smart, because you're the same as you're smarter or you're not so much dumber than other people. Right? Different people have different standards for how they're supposed to measure up to other people. We're constantly comparing ourselves to other people in order to figure out if we're doing okay. Why would we need to do that if we weren't fundamentally helpless and then everything's a crutch after that? We might say, oh, I'm okay because I have people who love me. Well, if you're okay because you have people that love you, then you're fundamentally helpless, and then you're only not because if you're not helpless because of a crutch or because of other people or because of money that you have, or because of intelligence that you have, or morality, then you're helpless, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Fundamentally, functionally, you might not be helpless now, but it's like if you have a fortress and you're telling people how impregnable your fortress is, and that's why you can't get hurt, then that statement can only be true. That statement presupposes that if someone got into the fortress, they could hurt you, but the reason they can't hurt you is because of the fortress, right? So that's how people live their lives, and wherever that fortress, wherever their real defenses that really matter to them reside and that really matter to you, that has to be protected at all costs. Generally, that happens by your brain not even giving the option, by keeping it secret even from you, and causing you to avoid situations or feel like, and people wonder about motivation, but your mind will just make you feel like you're not motivated for something, and it'll often just be to protect something. I mentioned about comfort zone. A couple of things here. Not sure if I remember exactly what I was going to say at the time when I started to mention it. I know I have a couple of things about it. One pretty fascinating thing is that we often let our comfort zone determine our goals rather than figuring out what we really want. And then what'll happen is, see, if you make a goal outside of what you currently feel like is possible or comfortable, then the reason that's helpful, there's a reason for it, is because again, until we really get underneath things, then in particular, your mind is not going to really want to try to build a foundation and seek understanding. It's going to want to stay on like kind of the current mountain that you're climbing, so to speak, metaphorically, and just climb up that or stay in the box that you're in and achieve what's achievable within that box. And as long as your goal, and you'll tend to feel without realizing it often that's why that you feel motivated to have goals within that box, not have goals outside of it. When you do have goals outside of it, then it will force your mind to expand outside of the box and expand its foundation. But again, until we understand well enough about this whole thing and how this works, then your mind will try to hurry up and do that as quickly as possible, which means it isn't going to build a very good foundation. Another way to look at this is if you think about what food you want to eat by what seeds you already own, then that's one thing. But if you think instead about what food you'd theoretically like to eat, then you can realize you can order seeds other places, right? And so forth, right, to plant in your garden. So however you want to look at it to understand this concept, you can start to notice this a bit, where your goals will tend to fit inside your comfort zone. And then if you, the whole idea of a comfort zone comes from this misunderstanding of seeking understanding, and how that feels like painful to your mind often, is to expand a foundation and so forth. It feels painful because of the focus on results and leaves. It's if you're trying to get a leaf right away, then planting a seed is not a very efficient way to do it, right? You pretty much just need to find something that's already planted and yank a leaf off of it, right? You have to like feed. There's no creation there, right? You need to feed off of something that already exists, either that you've already made or that someone else has made, and trade something you have for it, or whatever. And that's okay. As when you recognize it for what it is, it's perfectly fine, of course, to trade with other people and so forth, and to reap what you sow and so forth. But to the extent that you don't have enough yet, then you want to be planting seeds, right? What happens is if you don't realize how this works, then as you start to, let's say you plant a few plants early in life or whenever, even later in life, and you plant them and you tend to them and they grow some stuff. As the fruit starts to be picked and you start to run out of the fruit of whatever you built, you start to feel a sense of like depression, panic, shrinking, sadness. You don't really know exactly why that's going on, in a sense. And then when you create again, all of a sudden you feel a sense of empowerment. You start planting a new seed. Your mind might make you feel like, oh, you don't want to do all that again. But that's again only if you, when you're seeing things the wrong way to begin with, where what you really want is to pick the fruit, and instead you don't want to think that. You want to think, all right, it's going to be great to pick the fruit, but what I really want and what I'm going to do, period, is tend to foundations, and the rest will take care of itself. To do that, you're going to need to be able to not always identify with just your body and your mind, or else it'll be again confusing when I'm saying that, because you'll think, well, if you think you're only your certain part of your mind, or type of your mind, and your body, then you'll be confused when I say you only have to tend to your foundation and nothing else, because you'll figure don't have to do stuff. But that isn't, as I say, that's not a problem. Of course, your body's going to do stuff and your mind's going to do stuff. Like, you don't need to try to shove answers into a new space. Your mind will do that all by itself. Part of not identifying with your mind and your body is to appreciate all that they'll do without you really trying. Right? So those answers come, and they'll basically come often from your mind, or your mind will have something to do with it. But you didn't have to like push it out like giving birth. You just focus on the creation of the question, right? In this case, and then let your mind fill in the answers. Or if the answer doesn't get filled in right away, then again start to build outward and build around. And what do I know? And where might I start to find the answers? Or what might I build to start to grow something that might give me the answer, or give me the next step toward the answer. All right, let me see if I can somewhat bring things to a little bit of close just for this webinar. I'm not going to overrush doing it, but and then get to talking with you guys a little bit here. Remember, we're not going to fill in all the answers here as much as I would like to, right? I'm never trying to be like the Sphinx or some kind of guy sitting there in a lotus position, just trying to be mysterious or difficult. I always want to make things happen as quick as possible, right? If I'm trying to make strawberries, it's one thing to understand how to get them to grow as quickly as possible, which is what I'm trying to do, but I can't just make them grow even faster than that. And maybe there is a way, but I don't know, right? Maybe there is a way to explain this even faster, and I'm always working on trying to figure out how to do that. But all I know is what I know now, right? All I can do is what I've gotten the foundation for right now. Let me. So when I talked about zooming in, like when I talked about the phrase "I love you," or if you say like I want to rank a website, you can write that sentence down in your notebook and start to look at any kind of operative words in there, and think about whether it might help to understand what those words. Well, what is a website? Well, actually, you might, when you look at that, you might say, oh, actually, any web presence will be enough. So a YouTube video is fine, or even you might start thinking about what other web presences you might be able to rank, rather than just websites, and rather than just websites and YouTube videos, right? So even just looking at the word, writing down, I want to rank a new website. Then if you circle website, you might realize, as you zoom in on that, you might realize you didn't need website. That's kind of too chunked up. It's too much of a general blurry concept. And as you start to zoom into it, a new type of space is created and more things come in there. And first, again, YouTube videos and a normal website might come in. And then you might think of other web presences, a Shopify site, or different type of blog page, or who knows what, or that you can find. There used to be, blanking on Squidoo, that's gone now, but it's a neat little simple e-commerce type of site. You can make pages on there. And then you might also ask, well, why do I want to rank a website, right? And you can kind of complete the sentence more. And then are there any other ways that I could accomplish this same thing in addition to ranking a website? And then by asking that question, then space is created conceptually, and you'll continue from there. And as you deal with life this way, I'm going to continue. And when you come up with a great idea, when a great answer fills itself in that you're excited about, what's going to happen? Are you going to pick your navel and stare at the wall? No, right? You're going to go do it naturally. It's not going to be a problem. You're not going to have to wonder about how to motivate yourself. You're going to have a cool idea. It's going to be exciting. And you're going to go do stuff, right? And then you want to also have some time to reflect on that, either when you're stuck or when you're finished, or just in parallel to doing that. But there's never going to be a problem with taking action, doing this. Don't worry about it. And again, I live this. I don't have a problem. What if we seem to be paying attention, but we're rubber stamping what the lawyer is saying? I'm opening up a can of worms with this, a few things. What I mean is, suppose we're thinking, right, and we're like paying attention. We're wondering, am I really creating a new space, or am I just kind of free associating and hearing my mind just kind of giving me like one idea and then another thought and then another thought? It's kind of free association, or a thought train that's kind of going along, and I'm sort of agreeing or feeling, even if I feel like, oh, that's great, or that's great. One thing that's interesting, that's another type of thing that I'm going to look to develop with you over time, is, and this is a way of putting it that's actually not my own, it's something they're discovering in psychology over the last several years, or maybe decade or so. There's an idea that your mind functions much less like a scientist or like a philosopher or a thinking machine. It functions much more, like a lawyer, where your reasons for doing things, if you were to ask yourself, why am I doing this, or why am I feeling excited today, or why am I feeling not so motivated, or why am I feeling scared here, then or why did I buy this thing that I bought, or why do I like this person, then and this is important for other people if they're buying something from you. If you were to ask a client, either a potential or an actual client, after they say yes, why did you buy from me, they're going to come up, the reason that they came up with is going to tend to not actually necessarily be the reason why their mind subconsciously made them feel like making that decision. Your conscious mind functions a lot more like a lawyer than like a rider on an elephant, or like a scientist or a dispassionate observer or something like that. Or a salesperson trying to sell you basically your mind comes up with desires and thoughts, and then it tries to sell you on it consciously like a salesman or like a lawyer, and the reasons it gives you are not necessarily the actual reasons. Let me wrap up here. This is I'll kind of stop the monologue right about here, even though there could be much more, but we'll continue next week. Let me read you something. This is a book, and I read a number of books like this, but this is just an example, just the latest one that I'm reading. I can give you other ones as well, but the book is called Subliminal by Leonard Mlodinow, is the way you pronounce that. He wrote this: suppose your family vacationed in Disneyland last summer. Looking back, you might question the rationality of having braved the crowds and 95-degree heat to watch your little daughter spin in a giant teacup. But then you might remember that when you planned the trip, you assessed all the possibilities, concluded that her big smile would be all the payoff you needed. we're usually confident that we know the causes of our behavior. And when I'm talking about this, this type of area, this area that I'm delving into here, this is also going to help you convert. One of the biggest blocks to conversion is the assumption that other people behave rationally and make decisions in a rational manner. Or simply that it's even when people say, oh no, they make decisions emotionally, people really, even if they say those words, they still think in this kind of accidental, naive fashion as if people really are aware of the reasons for their behavior and the reasons make some sort of sense, even if they're emotional. I'm continuing to read now. Well, I'll repeat that phrase. That last sentence is pretty useful. We're usually confident that we know the causes of our behavior, and sometimes that confidence is warranted. Yet if forces outside our awareness play a great role in our judgment and behavior, then we must not know ourselves as well as we think we do. Each day we ask and answer many questions about our feelings and choices, such as I took the job because I wanted a new challenge. I like that fellow because he has a great sense of humor. Or I trust my gastroenterologist because she lives and breathes intestines. Each day we ask and answer many questions about our feelings and choices. Our answers usually seem to make sense, but nonetheless, they're often dead wrong. In other words, the reasons we think that our mind came up to do things are often dead wrong. I'll continue here. How do I love thee? Elizabeth Barrett Browning, right, who wrote that poem, felt she could count the ways, but chances are she couldn't accurately list the reasons. Today we're beginning to do just that, as you'll see when you have a look at the following table. It shows who has been marrying whom in 3 states of the southeastern United States. One would think that both the who and the whom of who married for love. One would think that both the who and the whom, married for love, that the reason for marrying was love, and no doubt they did. But what is love's source? It can be the beloved's smile, their generosity, grace, charm, sensitivity, or size of his biceps. The source of love has been pondered for eons by lovers, poets, and philosophers. But it's probably safe to say that none has ever waxed eloquent about the following particular factor, the person's name. This table, however, shows that a person's name can subtly influence your heart if the name matches your own. And what he has here is a chart, and basically it's the 5 most common names, which are Smith, Johnson, Williams, Jones, and Brown. And if you look at the number of Smiths and you look at how many Smiths, people with the last name Smith, like women with the last name Smith, married a guy with the last name Smith, it's more than how many girls whose last name Smith married the last name Johnson, Williams, Jones, and Brown combined. And even, for example, there's almost twice as many Smiths as Browns, but the number of people who married Browns is 82. So if your name is Sarah Brown, the number of Sarah Browns or whoever named Brown, that married a guy whose last name is Brown is about double the number of Smith, 82 of them versus 44, even though Smiths are twice as common. So never would they actually list the last name as something that was part of why they married somebody, and yet it clearly is influenced behavior. There's another kind of funny experiment where people at a theater were given, if they asked if they would answer a few questions in order for a free tub of popcorn and a drink, and the questions were a ruse. They were really testing something else. They gave people, there were 4 different possibilities what they would give people in terms of popcorn. Either a larger or a smaller tub of popcorn, and then the popcorn was either good popcorn or it was intentionally made pretty soggy and stale and terrible. Okay, and when they had just people test separately those popcorns, they definitely could identify that this is good and this is soggy and terrible. But if you look at how much people ate of the popcorn, it was correlated to how big the box was, much more than the taste of the popcorn. But then if you ask them why they chose to eat the popcorn and as much as they did, they would never say because the box was large. Sorry, they would never say, either because the box was larger, or they wouldn't say that, of course, well, the popcorn tasted terrible, but I ate a lot of it because the box was big, right? So all of these things influence people's behavior, and we don't realize it. The point isn't to try to make a whole index of these things and use them to sell people. That's not how I use this stuff at all. The point is to be aware of the default functioning of our own mind and realize that it's going to be off all kinds of times, and it's kind of fun to read about them And next time I could show you some further examples. Oh, well, let me refer that this is the final thing as the monologue will end here. But kind of a fascinating experiment. People were asked to kind of rate the preferences of someone that they knew a little bit, and then rate how confident they were about whether they were right about whether that what the person's favorite food or what they might do in certain situations. So they had to judge how well they knew somebody, how they could predict a person's preferences and behavior of someone that they knew a bit, and then they also had to rate their own confidence that they were right about that. And as you might guess by now, or the people are very overconfident about their guesses about what other people are thinking. But two further things that's even more interesting. Now, you would think that if someone knew somebody very, very well, like if they've been married for a decade or more, then they would do better, right? They would do better on guessing the other person's preferences, what they might want for their birthday, and so forth. That's correct. It's a little bit, it's significant, but by just a little bit more, people do guess better, a little bit, but just a little bit better, not a lot better. If they've known someone really, really well, they still don't guess all that well, but they guess a little bit better than if they didn't know the person that well. They knew him, but not that well. But here's the amazing thing, or one of the amazing things. Their overconfidence goes up. So the discrepancy between how sure they are that they're right about their significant other, the person they've been married for 10 years or something, what they want, that they correctly guess what they want for their birthday and what things they like and don't like, their overconfidence goes up. So their certainty when they have to say, well, I think it was this, I think it's that, then let's say they get like a 60% or 70%. Their confidence level would be like 90%. They would say, in each individual question, they'd say, oh, I'm 90% sure about that, I'm 80% sure about that, I'm 100% sure about that. And if you average out their confidence level, maybe it's around 90. You average out their how right they are about things, and maybe it's around 60 or 70. But anyhow, whatever the actual number, it can depend on how the test is done. But what's interesting is their overconfidence margin goes up further. So their overconfidence, the difference in how sure that they were right compared to how right they actually were for an acquaintance might be like a 20-point difference, like 60% right, 80%, whatever. But then it goes up even further for someone that they know, where maybe they're 65% right, but they're 95% confident. So the difference of 30. And don't worry about the actual numbers that I'm giving you. But that's interesting. One thing that didn't help people was to have them intentionally imagine that they're the other person. That did not help get people in the other more accurate answers, amazingly enough. There is a way to do that that I'll teach you sometime soon, that you can actually get in the other person's head more properly. I can give you, since I brought it up, I can give you a bit of a hint. You want to really triangulate in, really imagine you're actually the other person physically, get yourself kind of much more thinking about their life, little details of their life, and imagining it being you, until you're kind of the hero of the story as them. We all kind of deal with life. This is different than being egotistical. Just our perspective in life is more like we're the hero of the story than as we talk, like we're like the protagonist of a novel, in essence, is kind of how people function in life. And unless you imagine yourself as someone else to the extent that you're the protagonist, that you as them, like that they're the protagonist in the novel rather than you, then until and unless you do that. But I'll develop that more in the future. Okay, let's go to the phones here. Let's take a look at what people are saying. This is the time now you can type in whatever, and we can see what's going on. Let's see here. I'll go over here. Twisted. People like the Twisted Sister. Of course, there wasn't a lot of time for questions. Oh, great. Mind-blowing. Excellent. I'm glad you're enjoying this. Let me make sure also that I'm... you might have noticed I don't really use Facebook much. I didn't want to accept a lot of friend requests because I didn't want people thinking that I used it when I didn't. I just didn't want to confuse or mislead people. I'm not trying to be antisocial necessarily. Okay, all right, it's good. We got more stuff going on here. I'm glad I refreshed that. Hey, how you doing? You can probably showing up on the screen there. Right, exactly. Majority of people rate themselves above average drivers, which by definition is impossible. One of the interesting things about reading about overconfidence, I mentioned that what happens is we all will have this secondary defense mechanism, and this is the real killer. The first thing isn't such a problem, but the funny thing is that really we'll read this and think, okay, that won't do that. Just like people will read about the experiment where people gave lethal doses of an electric shock, right? The famous milligram. I think it's milligram. I'll look up the exact experiment at some point and go over it. But everyone hears that basically and says, oh, I wouldn't do that. And yet everyone else does, right? And so it's important. We need to break through that second barrier of defensiveness, which we'll be able to do that. But our first instinct is to feel like it doesn't really apply to us. Oh, I'm so glad that many things started to sink in, and that this was helpful. What is a great goal to start with? It's a great question. So it's code, right? For I don't know the answer. That's a great question. But genuinely, that's a great type of thing to ask. What's a great goal to start with? Well, you can ask what a great goal to start with is. One thing you might have heard me say is that the most important question, in a certain sense, is how do we know what's true? Another type of question is like, what's really going on? Is a type of thing to ask. Or you can, what was it that I was thinking? I wanted to talk more about the idea of foundations today, but I'll cover that more next time. I certainly said a decent amount of stuff, but I'm looking forward to more things that I'll share. I feel like I had something in mind, like a new type of question besides just how do you know what's true. You can ask like what the right foundation in general is to have for your life. You can get a sense of trying to think about who you really are. Identity is a great thing to think about. And I'll help you with answers for these things, of course. I'm not going to drive you down a whole, blind alley forever or anything like that. And I'm always, of course, trying to fill in as many answers as I can. Oh yeah, the photocopy example. That's a famous one, where a woman, a psychologist, did an experiment where she would say, "May I go ahead?" And there's a line to use the copy machine, and she would ask to go ahead of the line. And first she would give like a decent reason, like because I'm in a particular rush or I really have to get somewhere. And then she just changed it. She was curious, and then a certain percentage of people let her through, like about 2/3, or maybe more. But then when she asked, "Do you mind if I go ahead because I have to make copies," which is like saying nothing, then it was still a very high percentage. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a very high percentage of people let them through just with, "Can I go ahead because I need to make copies?" Right? So there's no reason whatsoever, but just using the word because. But one of the things and I'll go to the other group too to take a look. One of the things that's fascinating though is the people that write these books. It doesn't really help them. They don't really explore the foundations of their own life, right? There's a way to just kind of keep this encapsulated or within your comfort zone about these things where your brain messes up in a consistent way. It's really fun. I really enjoy reading about these experiments. Probably a lot of you do too. But it's interesting to note that just being aware of these doesn't really help people that much. Although in combination with what I'll talk about, then it is fun and useful. David, how do you become aware that you're not focusing on creating? How do you become aware that you're being impatient and looking for answers? Okay, great. Well, first of all, if you feel impatient, then that's an indication, right? I mentioned the idea of mixing, and one of the cool things is that pretty much all emotions have ingredients that get mixed in order to form them. So impatience would be something that you can mix ingredients and get. And then if you don't want to feel impatient, then you realize the ingredients got mixed and you didn't want them to be mixed and you unmix them. You take one of the ingredients out. Let me think if I can, on the fly, figure out with impatience. Part of dealing with not rushing and impatience one of the things that I knew first was that I didn't want to feel that way, and then I had to figure out what the foundation of it was, what the mixture was in order to get rid of it. You can't just will yourself not to feel impatient, right? Again, you need to figure out what's coming together. And let me think if you guys have enough building blocks, and also what my how do I do this? In one sense, I gave the answer in that you'll kind of always end up predictably feeling impatient from fairly often if you feel like if you're really successful here, you would get results. Like what you really want is results. And there's a way that if you think about how you grow a plant, it's such a good metaphor. I almost feel like it's why God made plants, in essence. You might think that we need them for food, but God could have created the world all kinds of ways, potentially, right? But I think that the way plants work, one thing I am aware, the world is so full of metaphors. Even the fact of are we able to have kids and so forth, rather than happening a different way, because it's a real pain in the butt the way it happens now with having kids. But there's all kinds of metaphors in the world to help us realize what's going on, even though they're not really helping people all that much, but they could. And if you think about, well, what if I was growing strawberries or any kind of plant that you can picture and you're aware of? How would I go about that in a way where I wouldn't be silly in being impatient, right? And then look at the task that you're doing the same way, where think of it like growing a plant and say, well, how am I doing something metaphorical to just staring at my strawberry plant thinking that they should grow faster and feeling like there's something I must be able to do to make them grow faster. There may be something you can do, but it's always going to have to do with tending to the foundation better, if that makes sense. And including even when you think of taking action, you will automatically take action. There's not going to be any stopping you. If you build the right foundation, the right understanding of what to do, you have the right breakthrough or thought, then you're not going to have any problem taking action. And so then you'll just kind of excitedly do it, but you won't do it in an impatient way. So that's my answer for now, and I'll make a note of that question if I have my pen around. Let me look for my pen. That's one of my son's trucks that I had my table falling to the floor. I'll make a note. Let's see, my notebook's always at hand right here. I ran into an OMGer at Whole Foods near where I live, Jeremy, and he introduced himself. And I had my notebook. I was sitting there with my notebook working on LOI, so it's the real deal. I practice what I preach. Make a note of how do you become aware of impatience? For now, a little bit of just noticing it also will help to open up a space and motivation for as I continue to help you see how life works so that naturally it'll go away, this feeling of impatience. What is one sentence you remind yourself of in order to stay positive? And then I see. Thank you, Sebastian. And then probably there's a lot of different responses in there. Let me just quickly, I'll come back to this. Are you going to cover the proof of God concept in any of the trainings? Yes. Yeah, I'll get to that for sure. Because it all matters. I don't really think in terms of automatic boxes like politics or religion or whatever. It's very relevant. Exploring the issue of evolution and creation and God's existence and how things have to work was a critical part of understanding how life works in general and how to accomplish goals. Oh, let me share with you something that sparked something for me. Let me just share with you again a statement that you can work with as you want, and then I'm sure it'll come up here and there. People, among zillions of errors that come from having the wrong foundation in life of helplessness and then trying to compensate for it. One of those things is that people actually twist the idea of faith to a different and basically worthless or weakened or unhelpful or counterproductive concept. And you're almost certainly doing this to a certain degree. Is people treat the idea of faith as faith that they're like on the right mountain, that they have the right foundation. that they already have the right foundation, like faith in someone else, faith in yourself, that you're already good enough. That's what people understand faith to be, pretty much universally. And really, the powerful, the concept that's very powerful that I think Jesus really meant by faith is faith that there is a correct foundation. Put in the context of how we know what's true, people will normally have faith that they know what's true, that they already know what's true. Instead, what my understanding of faith that I think is much more empowering and actually powerful is faith that, and this is specifically what I did that really sparked things for me when I was 16, is faith that there is a way to know what's true and that it can be found. I'll cover local peak theory next time for sure. And when I talk about like that you're on the right mountain, it's like if you imagine trying to climb a mountain, right? And that going up is better. But then there's the issue of being on the right mountain to begin with. And so people twist the idea of faith into the idea that faith that they're already on the right mountain, rather than faith that there is a right mountain or right foundation out there. And that's a very powerful idea, what I just shared, that distinction. Let me refresh this here. I just realized, because I was reading about the decisions, the reason, right, like the last names and so forth is why people, I just realized I joined OMG because David Mills looks like an older brother. That's terrific. We need more people with older brothers that good looking. Brilliant, David. This is transformational. You're very welcome, Josh. I'm so glad. Mike Swanson, how come when you create something you get real satisfaction more than just pleasure or fun? What's going on when you create is you're also implying, it's the time that you're implying for real that you're not helpless. When you really create, when you do things that truly open up a new conceptual space, which then gets filled with ideas, which then can, of course, cause you to just take actions with your hands and your mouth and talking and so forth that obviously lead to the actual physical world being changed too, right? You make stuff and so forth. But that's all an offshoot, right? It starts with a creation of conceptual space in the two ways that I mentioned. Where you are asking these kind of what-if questions or mixing concepts in such that a new space has to be created to hold the new mixture, right? When I talked about imagining making an affiliate website, or when you're zooming in on existing concepts and trying to understand them better, then in both those cases, creation is happening, and that will lead to better thinking, and then it'll lead to taking action and making stuff in the real world or influencing people better in the real world. And when you're doing that, you feel so good because you're implying that you're not helpless. And you're implying that and actually good is being actually created if you're doing this right. And it's, again, the only thing you can do that implies that you're not helpless. And so there's a different beautiful joy in that. Otherwise, you're pretty consistently implying, without realizing it, that you're helpless by being defensive about being helpless, by trying to build up resources in order to not be helpless. You can build up resources, but not in order so that you're not helpless. You can build up resources in order to have more good for yourself and other people. That's different than building resources in order to not be helpless. You can, for example, have a wonderful romantic relationship in order to have more good in the world for yourself, for your partner, and for the other people that you influence, and the energy that frees up and so forth. Or you can believe, and you could do both of these at the same time, but you can also, to some degree, believe that you're okay in life and you're happy because you have a romantic relationship. If it can be the reason for a particular good, a resource or a relationship, and that you enjoy and appreciate, but having another good that you enjoy and appreciate is different than something that you need in order to be happy. If you feel like you need a resource or a person, then you're assuming that you're helpless, that you're going to be less happy or unhappy without them. This can lead to a paradox for people, but you can resolve it. Suppose I cook a meal and then I enjoy it. Then I made something good, right? That made me feel good, and I enjoyed it and appreciated it. I needed to create that meal. I needed that meal in order to get that particular good. But you can always be creating something that can give you a sense of something good. So you don't need one thing or another necessarily. Needs are like kind of relative to a particular goal, and if some particular goal is unreachable or not something that you want to focus on, then you can just work on something else and have good that way. It's a terrific thing in life to have a meta strategy so deep that you never feel stuck, and that's part of what I'm trying to give you is if you get to the core meta strategy in life, then you always can operate even if you're far out of your box that you typically have a foundation of, because you know you have the most basic foundation in life. If you know what to do no matter what, which is to seek understanding, build your foundation, create, these are all angles on the same exact thing, seek understanding and so forth. If you know that you can always do that, then you can understand that you're fundamentally not helpless, and you can always operate. You'll never be stuck, and then you can understand how it feels to know that you'll never be stuck. And then that's a great feeling in and of itself, and then that leads to a positive spiral where you can have a different sense of who you are, and self-image is your sense of self can be, like I talked about, it can be a way to experience different goods and more goodness, but it's not necessary in order to protect you from feeling helpless. Yeah, it'll take a while to let it sink in. And by the way, we want to have less in terms of course, I'm not picking on you, Mike, but have less. We want to a little bit watch the metaphors. And I'm glad you said that so I can point this out. I talked about the idea of force and motion. It's not just force, but also even motion is, in a sense, like a figment of our, it's not really a figment of our imagination. I'm joking when I say that. But it's not a cause of things. Just laws don't cause things, forces don't cause things, and motion doesn't cause things. None of these things are just like color doesn't cause things. It's just something that you experience, but it's not a cause. It's not power. So you don't want to think in terms of it sinking in. You more want to think in terms of mixing. So the more you mix what I'm talking about by zooming in or by asking what if and applying it to situations, and then of course I'll walk you through that when I'm with you. But you can do that yourself. So it's a little bit different than having it move by itself. Instead, you want to mix and create. How do you organize your study and questions? Not very well. I have a notebook. I write questions. I write thoughts. I write stuff like, okay, here's the final stuff that I'll put on my slides for this webinar because it's an hour away. Things like that, and then I'll write stuff there. But basically, I ask questions and then I write down answers. So I write down questions and answers. Is maybe the best way to put it. And I just keep on going, and then sometimes I look back at what I wrote. That may or may not be optimal. Interestingly enough, organization, when you really need it, make sure you do it. Right? If you're, it'll be. But here's an interesting factoid. Something I've known for a while back in my accelerated learning days, but they've done experiments and. Imposed organization, like if a textbook is organized well versus unorganized information, doesn't affect learning. It doesn't help someone learn better. If there's organization that's imposed from an external source, then people don't learn better. Then what definitely helps people learn is if they impose their own organization. Why? Because to do that, you're creating, right? Then that will help you learn. By the way, as you're creating, when you're trying to learn something, then you're making little goals. And basically your mind will remember things that are related to goals that you have. But even little micro goals, like when you're creating your own organization, then that you'll have the little micro goals as you're doing that. Like, oh, what goes here, what goes there, what goes next, right? What do I put next? What does this go? What category should this fit in? When you ask a question, that's a goal, right? Like a question to say is literally a goal, or literally goes hand in hand with a goal, I could say. You're welcome, Mike, for saying yes, mixing in things. Wow, the concept about faith is great. I'll be thinking about this in more depth. Exactly right. Excellent. It's really something. And I can't tell you, I've been working on the idea of faith. That's at least, I asked the question like 20 years ago. I've been working on it. I knew that something had to do with that concept. And I'm not specifically talking about religious faith or anything mysterious, right? Just obviously faith is something that matters no matter what the heck our initial religious thoughts are, or even thinking about religion at all, just the faith to go rank a website or the faith to go talk to a potential client or something like that. But yeah, what I said there, it took me forever to figure that out, and I had to really build so much other knowledge and understanding until I got that clear on the idea of faith that I said. And again, what I said was that um, people twist the idea of faith into faith that they're already right, that they already have the right foundation, basically, that they're already good enough to do something, that another person or another source is already going to be right. And remember, if you interact with a source, like if you read a book, that, or if you hear me, then by the time you hear me, it's already mixed with your mind. So now you're having faith in your translation or interpretation of what the other person's saying, which is even more dubious, right? So instead, you don't want to have faith that you're already on the right mountain, or that the box you're already in is right, or that the seeds you already have are sufficient for your culinary or needs. But you want to have faith that you can find the right foundation, or build the right foundation, or cause the right foundation to be created. Again, you create essentially space by seeking understanding, or even the space is sort of created for you. But you seek understanding that leads to the creation of space, that leads to filling in answers. And those answers might be lattice work. That might not be the exact answer to your question yet. You might need to build a whole bunch of lattice work, right? I had to build for years or decades until I realized this about faith, because it's so universally thought otherwise. And my other answers, I had decent answers from a while back, but not as specific as this distinction about faith that you're already on the right foundation versus faith that the right foundation exists. And that really helps me identify what I did when I was the night when I was 16. And I had this idea that it must be, if it was so important to have a relationship with God in life, then there must be some way to know or understand that God existed and the basic nature of God. It doesn't really make sense that it's so important to have a relationship with God if we can't even really know what God's like. The idea of having faith that we already know, or that it's already, I don't know, or to believe what we already believe, it didn't make sense to me. So I had faith that there was a proper foundation, and that's what led to everything else. I have not read Neville Goddard's work. I can look that up later. Mike Long, just a hashtag boom. Hey, Mike. Thanks for the boom. Thanks for lowering the boom there. Really makes you think. Yes, it does. Okay, let's see what else we got here. David Mills, should one be impatient to reach out of one's comfort zone or expanding it? No, you don't need to be impatient to do that. Basically, what you want to do in life, and I'm a little bit repeating myself here, and I will develop this more, I guarantee you. But for now, all you ever really fundamentally need to do in life is to figure out what you want, like what fruits you want, and then work to build the right foundation, plant the right seeds, and develop around that seed. And that might include, sticking with the metaphor, that might include going out and asking questions about and learning more about what might help the seed grow, that sort of thing. You don't need to be impatient. You can feel something called creative tension, which is in my original series. I think it's labeled like the 2013 series. That's still good stuff in there. And I gave a number of things that there were kind of models that you can apply now. I might better understand now why those models work, but they're still useful models. They're not going to lead you wrong. So ultimately, there's one and only goal that we want to have as a foundation, right? And that's the goal for everyone, to be maximally happy. And then that will, when you have that goal as your clear foundation, then you're not going to have any problem working on your foundation, because you obviously can't get there within your comfort zone or what you already know, right? Neither can I. And so I'm working on that goal using all my strategic ability to do so. I understand the basic technique has to do with understanding ideas that once people get them, once people assimilate them, they don't mix with other things and get degraded. They need to stay. And that's why that relates to the idea of being able to understand what's correct. Is there certain distinctions that once you have, you're not going to go back. And so if we can get people in a way that we're not going to, if the progress that we make improving the world is going to be stored and not degrade, then we can keep making progress and get to everybody eventually. Um, and I might have more ideas, hopefully, and almost certainly have more ideas about impatience for the future, because there's been a couple of questions about that, and trying to deal with that more and more. And already what I plan on sharing with you over time will build that more and more. Why do some people have a need to replace something with something else instead of letting go unconditionally, allowing the natural order of things? Perhaps I'm a little bit sticking in with the topics that I've covered, but perhaps that again relates to the idea of the fundamental assumption that we're helpless. And remember, it's not like you positively affirm or not that you're helpless, but if you track how it must have happened, how your mind got built, obviously you started out feeling helpless when you were an infant, and then everything else was built upon that. And so you need to, if your mind believes that it's helpless, that's the core assumption, and it's protecting you from feeling that way, right? People don't realize they feel helpless. They protect themselves from feeling that way. That's this defense mechanism that's so difficult to deal with. And it was getting in my way, trying to help people understand law of implication. But now that I understand it, we can identify it directly and go after it directly and dissolve it. Now that we know what the mixture is, we can dissolve it. I don't know if we'll dissolve it immediately or not, but we'll dissolve it. We'll get there. Maybe, and very possibly pretty quickly. Maybe for some people, I don't know, on this webinar or not. But I'm not worried about that. I'm not impatient for that. It's important that we don't get to where we just want to feel like we have the answer. We need to have clarity and really make sure that we understand it clearly, which that in and of itself is something I'll need to cover more. I've, of course, made recordings about it in the overview and rundown series, but I will certainly want to cover in this new Alchemy push that I'm doing. There's a major push where I'm really looking to get people over the edge, over the threshold in this whole series over the next several months. That's why I'm going to even go to twice a week for 4 months. So people need to replace it. If the core assumption is we're helpless and our brains, but our mind is trying to make us, and I use brain and mind interchangeably, the same as using computer and software or something interchangeably. That's perfectly fine for me to do right now. And I say both just so you don't latch onto one too much. If our mind or brain is trying to protect us from feeling helpless, but assuming that we are, it's like if you have a kid, right? Stephen Covey gave this story like this in the preface to, I think it was the preface, something like the preface. It might have been a foreword or something, who knows, to 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talked about how it wasn't until he realized to stop assuming his son was naturally bad at like sports or baseball and trying to compensate for that and trying to get him to succeed anyway, even though he was basically incompetent in Stephen Covey's mind. He realized that he was reinforcing the assumption in his son's mind that his son was incompetent, and that he was implying that his son was competent, right? Incompetent by all the suggestions he would give in trying to make his son competent. They all carried the seed, and you can go look this up and read it for yourself. It's a pretty cool story. They all carried the assumption of the seed that the son was incompetent, and he kept reinforcing incompetence even as he was trying to supposedly encourage competence. In the same way, your mind itself is reinforcing feelings of helplessness even as it tries to make you feel powerful by making you feel like between your self-image and other resources that you have, relationships with people, money, and so forth, that it tries to compensate. And that's why people need to replace stuff. Right? If I'm trying to protect myself from feeling helpless by being validated by a significant other, then if I break out of one relationship, I'm going to need to get another one real fast because it's my only way to not feel helpless. The solution, again, is to have a different foundational view of things so that you understand that you actually are not helpless. And I've already started to help you build that, and I'll continue showing you about the idea of creating is a big part of understanding how we're not helpless. That believes in his preconditioned insecurities, right? That's perhaps, depending on how you interpret this, it's another way of that's on the right track, exactly like I was talking about. You should understand about the brain, thoughts and beliefs and all that stuff, all your models and so forth. They have a corresponding, like if you learn something new or if you think something different or the same, it will have a physical, it will manifest itself physically, right? There'll be neurons firing off. As you think a thought repetitively, then the pathway will grow. There'll be more neurons in that same pathway and so forth. So there's always a physical basis or as far as we know, right? There may be some other mind that you have that's not based in the brain, right? That stands to reason if people can die and still be aware. I'm not saying that's the case or not, but there's plenty of people believe that, and there's plenty of reports of that. Then there must be something other than just the brain, right, that the mind is drawing from. But regardless of that, separately from that, then there's some physical basis for your thinking. And then, but people let things take on a greater reality than they need to. Just because there's a physical basis for your thoughts doesn't mean that that can't be rewired. Oh, and that's something I'm excited about sharing with you too, is in the future, is that one of the things that's going to help gain you leverage over your own mind, which you know you want, right? Sometimes you feel like your mind is taking a direction that you don't want, but you don't know how to change it that much, or you want to have more control over your mind. The key to that is going to be understanding, once again, it's going to relate to this idea of foundations. And you, right now, you feel and think as if there's a lot more basis to your thoughts and your beliefs and your decisions than there really is. I started to help with that with what was in this mind, but it's not just scientific. I don't rely on science. It just kind of, science is kind of fun to help ask better, more questions and so forth. But I don't prove things through science. I operate a different way. But we'll deal with that. Tending to foundations. How do you become cognizant of how your old default mental models seem to mix with your new mental models? And ultimately, how do you decouple and break the old? Cool. All right, here's what's going to happen. We just need to tend to building this new model that we'll build together. Sorry, I glanced at the other question, distracted me for a second, but I'll get to that in a moment. It will naturally be helping you. What you're going to do is you're going to build useful things that you're going to know. You're going to understand how to know. Like this thing I said about faith, right? Or this, what we've talked so far about creating by asking certain types of questions and creating conception, how that gets filled in. Those types of ideas, you'll come to see how they have to be correct. And you come to know things by seeing how the opposite has to be false, by the way. So you'll come to build these things and you'll see why they have to be right. And then they'll sit there, and whenever you hold them in your mind while a conflicting and false idea from your old model that's by logic it's going to be hurting you, right? If something conflicts with something that has to be true, then that conflicting thing has to be false. And if it's false and it's in your mind, it's going to be hurting you. If it's active, if you're noticing it, it's doing something, it's active, it's part of your thinking. So it will clash, and it'll get dissolved because it'll lose to this foundational stuff that you're developing. That may or may not happen now. It probably will happen to a good degree now. But the more you understand how to know what's true and see how that works, then that in and of itself will solidify what you'll build. You'll basically build this new creation that will build this new model. You need to build it fundamentally on the foundation of understanding how to know what's true. That's always the bedrock of everything else. I don't know what degree of understanding you currently have about that. I've discussed it, but I'm certainly going to go into that more. And I'm always demonstrating it, the idea of how to know what's true. And I pointed it out before in the overview and rundown series, and I just alluded to part of it, or a big part of it now, which is when you can distinctly see that something has to be false, or then the opposite has to be true. Is that like building that'll be an effect. The new neural pathways in your brain. The actual when you talk about neural pathways, those are in your brain, not your mind. In that case, the distinction does matter. Not that doesn't matter for what you're asking, but the new neural pathways will be built. That's correct. As you think thoughts that are more helpful, that will just like any thoughts that you think, that will lead to different wiring in your brain, and then default functioning will change, and then some of the deepest things will actually also get taken care of, in addition, and also some surface things and responses that you'll have. You'll basically be better off on a deep level and on a surface level. On a surface level at this point, I'm at the point now where I really would have to think fairly hard to think the last time I was like perturbed or certainly very upset. It was I have to go back at least weeks, almost certainly months, if not. I can't remember the last time. I can remember a time in my life, but it really was a while. It just doesn't happen to me much at all. And for example, I've never once been upset or angry with my son, who's going on 4. He's 3 right now. He'll have a birthday this month. And I don't pride myself. It's not willpower. I couldn't if I was willpower. None of this is about I'm better. This is about ideas and methods. And there are ideas that are correct, right? And methods that are correct. And I can report to you on the success of certain methods that I've been following, but that's all I ever mean if I'm talking about how I'm successful at something. But it's not through willpower. Through willpower, there'd be some times when I wouldn't presumably snap at him. I just don't view the world in a certain way where I ever feel like being upset with him. We keep asking. When you keep asking, you'll get to the answer, especially because you'll have my help. Then about how to know what's true, and then once you come to the answer of how to know what's true, once that gets filled in from you asking the question and tending to that, you don't just ask one question, by the way. That might get the answer, but you also need to sometimes build to the answer. And then once you are relentless and build enough to where the answer fills itself in properly, then you'll know how to recognize that answer and others as true. When you won't know everything that's true, but you'll sometimes be able to know some things. Then you'll start to build ideas that you know to be true, and then that will help to dissipate false ideas. What you can do also is if you know one thing is true and then you feel like something is true but you know it has to be false because it conflicts with something you know to be true, but if you still don't feel it, if the false thing still feels a certain way, then what you'll understand to do is realize that life has to do with mixing, not motion or forces, and you try to zoom in and look at the ingredients of what's coming together to make that false idea, and it's understanding the ingredients that will help dissolve it. I'll go over some examples of that in the future. According to law of implication, is belief in God necessary to success? Yes and no. Certainly it's not necessary to achieve various goals. Obviously people achieve goals without my help, right? And without believing in God. Overall, if we understand success to be everyone's maximally happy in a kind of ongoing way, then and we're eliminating wrong ideas, then I mean the idea of understanding God's existence and the basic nature of God and how that relates to see the trouble is we can't really understand what's going on with the world without understanding about God. People tend to think of religion as something that's sort of compartmentalized. Some aspects of religion might not be relevant or helpful and some are just false. But the idea of God's existence, you just can't understand what's going on in life without that understanding. So now, not belief, you're going to be able to understand it. You may have heard me say the phrase, it's actually not possible to believe that something is true. That's a contradiction in terms. You either know something is true properly through the right method or you don't. If you don't know, that doesn't make any sense to say you believe it is true. It doesn't make any sense to say that I believe something is true if you also would affirm you don't know whether it's true. You have to choose one. What you can do, the idea of belief that does make sense and that you can't really live without, is you believe as if things are true. And that's what you'll always do that. And that's one of the reasons why you're always not going to have trouble taking action. You can have trouble taking action for other reasons because of blocks, but you're not going to have trouble taking action as you seek understanding without forcing taking action, because you're always going to act at the level of your current belief and understanding. So you don't have to talk about believing that something is true, but you believe as if it is true. In other words, you act as if it's true. There's plenty of things you're never going to know. I don't know if they moved Starbucks while I was sleeping, and they played a big joke on me, but when I drive to Starbucks tomorrow or whenever I drive there, I'm going to believe as if I know where Starbucks is, right? I don't know that this mic is working right now for sure. I don't know that you're hearing me, but I'm believing as if that's correct. I don't know it 100%, but it's certainly reasonable to believe as if it's true. But once you start to have that distinction, and once you understand stipulating, which is another thing I'll cover in the future, then you can stipulate that something is true. It doesn't mean you're believing that it's true, but it's great because you're acknowledging that actually you don't know whether it's true. but it's like a placeholder. You're saying, all right, I'm gonna think based on whether on this is true. A kind of trivial example, but just to give one quick example of what I mean. If you're thinking about, am I going to tell someone that I love them, then you might think, well, do I even know for sure they exist? And you say, well, let's just stipulate that I know that they exist and move on, because I'm not going to sit around for the next year trying to figure out how do I know whether they exist or not. Much better to just move on. And if that issue becomes important, then I can delve into it. If I have reason to question their existence or the nature of their existence, then that might be relevant. But in order to move along with things, you can stipulate. Or if you're making a business plan, and I've used this example somewhere else, I'm not sure where, but if you're making a business plan and you have reason to believe that you have $5,000 seed money, then you can stipulate, okay, I have $5,000, and then what should my plan be? And conceivably that $5,000 can go away, or you can end up with 10,000 or whatever. But perfectly reasonable to stipulate that and then move along. By saying you stipulate it, you're not assuming it. It's different than assuming. You don't need to assume that it's true. You just stipulate, and then you can always go back to what you stipulated if you need to and zoom in on it and see if you want to stick with that stipulation. Thank you, Angela. That's really nice. Let me zip over here so I don't. Oh, thanks, Mike. Mike's been licking his chops. Great way. Mike's always very graphic and often gastronomic with his communication. One of his strengths. Well, you're welcome, Debbie. We hear you. Wait a second. Is this? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, that's right. It's funny. I was talking about. I don't know for sure if the mic. Well, still could be a conspiracy, Casey. Big reveal. We have a built-in belief that we're helpless. Will you be expanding this? Oh yeah, for damn sure. I'll be expanding on that. That's kind of one angle on the whole enchilada. It is correct, David Mills. That's awesome. I think I remember you talking about going over things that you may be struggling with before you sleep. Do you also go over your major goals nightly as a routine? I don't do that, no. If I do, right, but I will like to have one creative problem that I'm working on, and I do use sleep to as part of a process of working on something creative. Now, creative can have different nuanced meanings. I kind of put a little bit of can of worms there. Something I talked about even back in 2013, and I have a few videos that I talk about creativity, and they're certainly worth listening to still. And there's different things going on. There's different machines working, and there's you, who's not a machine. There's you as a conscious being who create in the way that you do, or who do something that leads to creation. But then there's your mind, your brain, and there's processing going on there, and you want to direct that processing and have it working on something, generally one thing, and I like to tend to that so that my mind works on what I want it to and not a bunch of other stuff. So not really goals then, more like I tend to my mind in general so that it's working on the things I want it to work on. Typically, again, one thing at a time that I'm trying to have like a breakthrough with, and I don't necessarily only do it as before I go to sleep. I'll probably attend to it in particular before I go to sleep if I feel like it might not be working on that. Sorry, that's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but that'll suffice for now. And I tend to try to, I know this is not always possible, but I try to have one, at least a kind of sub-goal that I'm working on. Of course, I have like my overall goal, and then but then I tend to have one thing I'm trying to accomplish at a particular time. I'm trying to think if that's misleading at all. And that's fairly accurate. You don't have to read like too much into that. Of course, really you can look at the conditions on the ground for your own life and use your own judgment. with that. But generally, it's also proportional to the breakthrough necessary. So if I have a bunch of if I'm more like consolidating and just have a bunch of things to do that aren't going to be too tough to accomplish, then that's different. Then that's one thing. Um, and if I need to kind of keep them all straight, then I might go over my goals because maybe my struggle, maybe the problem that I'm working on at that point is how to balance or be most efficient with balance carries a little bit of a loaded assumption, but how do I most effectively deal with a number of things that are going on in my life, and that in and of itself would be the issue. And so that's a better answer, William Smith. Um, is that I would go over my goals as an issue of how to deal with multiple goals most efficiently tomorrow, if that was the thing. Otherwise, if I just have the one, then I just more focus on the one. So glad I'm an OMGer. Love this, David. Well, so glad you're an OMGer too, Tim. Oh, you're welcome, Alana. Bolton, what is a good angle on the balance between confidence and overconfidence when it comes to business and making decisions that can affect the future? I do think about this question, by the way. So I might put it off. I'm trying to think, though, if there's some initial things. Remember the core idea of law of implication is I tell you to focus on what's true and building on what you know to be true, which is another angle. It's all saying ultimately the same thing, building your foundation and so forth. Now, there is a distinction about confidence. I mentioned there's this post by Jolene, which I mentioned I might get to, and she's it's pretty great. It's people only at NHB wouldn't have access to it. Maybe I can do a cut and paste afterwards so you can see it, or maybe you can. I'll get the replay up pretty soon. I'll put it on here, and then I'll scroll down, and at least on a replay you can look at more of it here. And so she made a pretty nifty post here, and just talk about foundations and building there and breakthrough. She talked about, I don't know if she would use the word foundation, so let me scroll up, but talked about breakthroughs. And one of them had to do with, she's working on building like breakthroughs and foundation in order to get clients and working like on foundation. So it's a really cool post she did earlier today. This is and so it just talks about self-love, trust, esteem. This is a core concept that needs to be in place for me. It's very obvious to me and everyone I think if a person I'm talking to does not have high level of self-esteem, and this would immediately close down any thought of buying something from them. So I will look at areas of my life that I can improve in order to be continually improving on my self-esteem. So I've been thinking about this because one thing I do want to help you guys build is a self-image that isn't subject to feedback, and it's not just a defense mechanism ultimately to not feel helpless. So that's important. However, there is something to being confident about your ability to do a particular task that you want to start to distinguish that from your overall self-esteem and your self-image, especially an overall self-image that's just there to compensate and defend against feeling helpless. So your competence in a particular task, and notice how these can blend together in an unhelpful way, and how it also makes it hard for us in dealing with other people having to worry about this for them. If we say that we're better at a particular task than them, then sometimes that's totally appropriate. Like if it's totally obvious, like if you're a doctor and another person's not, and they're hoping that you'll know about how to fix their arm, or whatever, their spleen or whatever. Then there's plenty of times in life, or if you're Greg doing SEO and someone's a new member of project of NHB of some sort, then it's easy for them to have no problem realizing that they want to learn SEO from Greg and it doesn't impinge upon their overall self-esteem. But there's other areas, of course, where it'll overlap. And it really should never overlap, by the way. There's never want to mix the two, competence in a particular area of life or type of task, and then your overall sense of goodness as a person, and even literally like how moral a person you are. And yeah, that really will overlap. It really will feel like a moral issue to people about whether they're good at certain things, and it'll feel like an attack that really is wounding if someone says something that has an implication or points out a problem that they're not good at a task that happens to overlap with their self-esteem. So regarding confidence and overconfidence and regarding getting clients, you do want to develop your confidence in your specific ability to rank websites for clients and to deal well with clients overall, to take care of them well and to deal with them well. Not just rank with their sites, but also interact with them in a way that that is effective for you and for them, whatever that might mean, right? But in terms of reporting to them in the right way, in terms of answering their questions and potential objections or whatever in a way that leads to a good result, right? Basically, the result of them feeling confidence in you and chilling out and going about their business and paying you, right? And letting you get about your business of ranking their site. So how do you do that? And really, the big first step in that is to fully divorce or distinguish between where your level of competence in any task. And one of the problems I run into in life, of course, is that people's ability to think is often something that overlaps with their ability of their own self-image and their basic general self-image and how good they are and how non-helpless they are, right, as a defense mechanism. So I need a lot of kind of lattice work or OMG in this whole situation managed to do that fairly well, right? Where I can talk to you about how to think in a way that doesn't feel threatening, probably, which is good, right? But in a lot of cases, I can't use my core ability of thinking accurately, conceptually, and it really made it difficult for me to earn money for a long time in life because, right, it would be like immoral or like feel like an attack if I was doing what I was good at. Whereas if someone's like a plumber, it doesn't feel like an attack on someone else if they presume they can fix the guy's toilet better than they can, right? In some cases it might, right? If a guy like prides himself on fixing a toilet and has to call a plumber, then he might feel a little threatened by that plumber. If his wife calls a plumber, he might be pissed off, like, hey, I can fix that myself. So it could be anything where someone, feels that overlap. But thinking is particularly one of those damn things, right? Where, because people are at a young age, even in school, right? People are told, well, think about it. Think for yourself about that. If you order someone to think about something in the sense of like they should do it, then it means that like if like it's kind of it implies that there's something wrong with them if they can't think, right? If someone says think about it in a way that they expect them to, you generally won't catch me telling people to think about stuff. Literally, really, because again, the implication implies that they can already think well. Which is a problem for people. It's better for people to stop thinking that they can think well. Again, what I said about faith. Stop having faith that you can think well, and start having faith that there is a way to think very well, and that you can build it for yourself. Because when else did it get built? In school or when you were one? And ever since you can remember, did you ever? Pretty much no one just stops and works on this really hard. I'm apparently have a propensity for this. Apparently, I'm good at this. It's a little vague. It's a little bit anecdotal, or from what my parents told me, but my IQ might be like in the 170 neighborhood, apparently. And the guy who tested me conceptually had said he'd never seen anything like it, and so forth. And I don't know how much the guy had seen or how accurate that is, but given that I've became a world champion in Magic and now am where I am now and teaching LOI, then presumably there was something to it. Plus, they picked on me when I was like 5. I didn't even have like a pocket protector. I didn't have glasses. I'm not criticizing these things, but I didn't have any of the typical things, and I was, I was reasonable all around. I wasn't like obviously bad at sports. I wasn't great, but somehow I was really people wouldn't be friends with me in my neighborhood, and they could be friends like in secret, but overall they couldn't, and I had a difficult time when I was very young in my neighborhood, and it was all based on the idea that I was really smart and I was a brain. They would pick on me because I was a brain. So I guess at least that makes someone think that they're smart. That's we want to even then though I developed what I developed not by thinking I was smart, but by thinking that I could figure things out perhaps and working on that. So anyway, that helps with the idea of confidence and overconfidence to some degree. Is you start by not having a confirmation bias where you need to feel confident in order to not to feel like a good enough person and to not feel helpless. And then once you generally in life, when you get rid of the confirmation bias where you really want to believe something emotionally, and it's going to sneak up on you. That's not going to be obvious. There's not going to be a big neon sign in your mind thinking, all right, confirmation bias time. You want to believe you're smart, so watch out, right? It's going to feel very subtle and different than that. But generally, it's the same thing with trying to get the right time frame on how long a task is going to take. Everyone, myself included, gets that wildly wrong. Even our worst case projection tends to be optimistic, and we tend to exceed it, and there's experiments on that too. So the first thing you want to do in order to have a proper projection of how long something's going to take you is you need to get rid of as much confirmation bias as you can, and possibly all of it, where you don't feel like if you were better, you should get it done sooner rather than later, right? If there's an absolute deadline, then there's an absolute deadline, and you could just focus, and then you just decide how much of a priority it needs to be, and you put the focus in. But anyway, the basic way to get rid of overconfidence is to get rid of the goal to be good, to believe that you're good at it, and instead get to again where you're doing the same style of thing, tending to the foundation, not worrying, not having a goal for the fruit, but or having the goal only. I'm going to need to develop this with you guys, but there's a way that you can have a goal in the sense of knowing what fruit you want without having a goal to get there faster, or that there's something better about achieving it, or other than what's good is the tending to the foundation. What's good, like not the right. But again, if you use the metaphor, the model of a plant, you can kind of see it decently. You can see it close enough that it should be pretty functional for you, where you identify what fruit you want, but then it's not like you're a better person if your strawberries grow faster, right? And if you are, it would be because you tended to the plant better, right? Not because you use your like willpower on it or something else, or did a better rain dance or something. Okay, I'll look to wrap up pretty soon here. Oh, nifty. Very empowering about faith. Excellent. Great. Giving my brain a real sense of calm. I'm so glad. I do tend to have that effect, and the only reason I say that is, again, you'll develop this even more and more, where you'll have that effect on people, and that'll make you more likable, right, and so forth. When you have your foundation in a certain way, then you'll come from that place, and it'll be calming. And where's that calm come from? I don't feel helpless, and it's not because I feel powerful in the sense of, oh, I have this resource or I have that resource. It's that I understand that fundamentally I can seek understanding, and in doing so cause creation to happen, first conceptually and then more manifesting and so forth. And no matter what situation I find myself in, then whatever that is, I adjust my goals appropriately and seek understanding and tend to the foundation. And in that, I don't feel helpless. And that comes across, and that makes other people feel a kind of calm feeling too. And that's the feeling I basically feel consistently. I pretty much always feel a kind of calm, happy feeling, pretty much all the time, and mixed with like joy and appreciation and so forth, and just appreciating like both stuff I have, like my house, my car, my family, and so forth. And I appreciate, and when people appreciate me, instead of it making me feel like less helpless or scratching an itch, it's just a very nice good that I can appreciate. Just like if you cook me a nice meal, then I can appreciate it. I wouldn't starve if someone didn't cook me a nice meal, but if someone did, then I would eat it. Presumably I would eat it and appreciate it. And that's kind of what it's like when you express your appreciation to me. How did you know that you did enough for a particular day in order to feel successful at a particular day of SEO project? I don't really look at it that way. I'm not looking to feel successful. I'm looking to have a sense of priorities in life of what I need to accomplish. First thing is get a stable base underneath you, and then grow from there. And so, and I make those things a pretty. Again, when you think in terms of priorities, I don't really do a lot of scheduling, unless, of course, I'm meeting someone else, then you have to schedule it. Otherwise, I do more priorities, and then I tend to do better in the morning, and so in particular, I'll work on that. But if there's something I want to get done, and I feel like it needs to get done, then I'll tend to work fairly nonstop on it, except for I have a priority of, spending a certain amount of time with my family, like, about an hour with my son, about an hour and a half at least with my wife. And that's not like, if that sounds weird, I'm not like checking my watch. I'm just giving you a ballpark figure. And I'm not checking my watch at all. But sometimes we're on the clock for various reasons, because, when you have a young son, there's all kinds of things happening next, like they're going to wake up from a nap or whatever. So anyhow, I will have certain things, certain carve-outs, we could say. And then other than that, if I need to do something, I'll probably just work on it nonstop until I get it done, pretty much. That's sort of my personality. Most of the things that I have to do in life, if I don't do them now, I have to do them later, and they'll kind of nag at me. But then other things, if they're more ongoing, then again, I'll just have a balance of of if I need to play some games or do something else, then I will. But I mostly don't. I'll stop playing game. I like to play strategy games and so forth, but I've stopped for months at a time if necessary. If I feel like I'm burning out, then what I try to do is design out of that rather than just take breaks. And I'm not advocating this or not. I'm just reporting to you what I do. I'm not saying this is how you have to do things, and really I'm not. Part of how we operate is based on we all have just different preferences, right? Just like I wouldn't tell you what food to eat because you might have a different preference. It might absolutely work for you to think, all right, what really works for me is I'm going to spend a certain amount of time each day at my hobby, and then a certain amount of time with my family, a certain amount of time, after sleep, and then I'm going to spend the rest working. And if I want to have more time for my family and hobby, then I do that by building out of my work, right? By designing a situation where I don't need to work as much in order to make the money I need. And by the way, when you're not making money in order to compensate for feeling helpless, then you need less of it. So you don't necessarily need to make an unlimited amount of money. Like it's not like an insatiable hunger necessarily. I have no problem with somebody wanting to make more and more money. I'm not being critical of that. I just don't. It just is. I think it's like food, where it isn't necessarily something that's going to work for everyone. And so that can work well for some people to want to make more and more money and set more goals and think of more cars they want to buy. And again, that can be their hobby, like literally. But only if it is your hobby do you want to pursue it that way. For me, making money doesn't really scratch the itch as a hobby. So I've made basically about the amount of money, roughly for $3 million, you can, with annuities, have your retirement taken care of, where you'll get about $10,000 a month from when you're 60. That's one of the million. For another million, you can take care of yourself pretty well until you're 60, almost no matter what age you are. And I'm being rough. If you dispute me, then all you'd be saying is, no, David, I think it's 1.3 million, and that's my point. It's not a big deal. And then for another million, you can live in luxury with a house and a car all paid off and whatever. Of course, you can adjust the numbers however you want, but just giving you an example. If making money is a real hobby that really works for you, then great. And that could be a great way to contribute to the world in all kinds of ways by making money. By doing so, you have to provide value for people, plus you can spend that money in various ways, helping people, helping yourself, whatever. But then for me, again, it doesn't really work as a hobby. So I grow OMG because it's so helpful. I ended up accidentally making something that is good enough that I want to help it continue. But it's also a great foundation to grow LOI, law of implication, off of. How do you break old habits? I notice that my body is extremely hard to control, as weird as that might sound. That'll fill in more over time as we continue. But basically, by thinking different thoughts and having different actions, then your neurons will grow differently. Tony Robbins talks about it's like scratching a record, but physically your neurons will grow differently as you. What I do is I get a wedge, and I look for that wedge or that foothold. Fundamentally, your strategy in life is, in one sense, build a foothold, and then the details take care of themselves. So what people do is they give up because they don't want to go farther and farther out into the context. They're like, okay, that's far enough outside of my comfort zone. Don't want to go any farther. When you stop thinking that way and you do whatever it takes, because all you're doing is building foundation, all you're doing is looking for more and more of a foothold, then you will naturally find some foothold. So if we're talking about like eating, then you keep searching until you find something that you know, like maybe that you don't want to be over a certain weight. For me, weirdly, I'm not I don't have that all taken care of in my life, but I stopped gaining weight like 8 years ago and haven't gained weight since. Previous to that, I kind of shot up and gained some weight like around when I got married, basically. But it was happening a little bit before that. But around when I hit 27, I stopped being able to like eat anything I wanted to. I used to be able to. But anyway, various footholds can work for you, and you at least focus on what you know. And I knew I didn't want to get any more than where I was. And that was pretty clear to me. When I say no, in that case, it's not like perfect knowledge, but it's good enough that I can stipulate it and work from there. And that was a good enough foothold to put the brakes on things. So at least that's at a stable base. It's like in a holding pattern until I focus in on it. But you basically go out and you get a foothold somewhere, somehow, and you continue to build from there. New thoughts and new actions until it clicks, new neural pathways built. Essentially, yes. And if whatever you're doing isn't working, you just search more and more in the context, or for more. You look around more, and you poke around, and you're always looking to poke around in order to build foundation. See, even when I'm building details, even when I'm taking action and doing stuff, then it's framed in a way that I'm building my foundation, because either it's working and that's just kind of fun, or if anything's, or actually if it works, then I ask, well, why did it work? And so I come up with new questions to ask. So I kind of take action in order to ask new questions. Either why is it working so well, which I get to ask a lot these days, or why isn't it working? And then I'm doing stuff and I'm building stuff, right? Obviously I don't have a problem taking action. I wouldn't have built OMG, and so on and so forth, right? So that's what I do though, regarding habits. I find creating gives me tremendous energy. Do I feel that too? Yes. I do feel that, because what you're doing when you're creating is you're going to unblock, especially energy. You don't really get energy, you more, I would say, unblock it. That might be splitting hairs. I'll look to develop that as well more in the future. Is law of attraction one of the foundations we should be working on, or is LOI be enough for itself? Thanks, David. Law of attraction I would use to sort of ask questions. It is not quite fully foundational, not quite deep enough in a sense. You also don't want to ultimately, it's a fine model, and I used the model of law of attraction in essence to build OMG, but I have a twist on it, which is we attract the implication of our thoughts. We attract what's really true based on our thoughts, rather than the surface of what we think we're thinking of. And the most obvious thing you can think of there is with helplessness. People will do stuff thinking that they're not helpless, or with that Stephen Covey example with his son, where the implication was incompetence, even though he thought he was trying to attract his son towards competence. He was implying, or he was assuming, or it was based, the foundation of his thoughts actually was incompetence, was assuming his son was incompetent. And that's what you're actually going to attract. And that's why LOI matters so much, because in order to figure out what you're going to attract, you need to figure out what you're really thinking, what the real implication is, what really has to be true based on what you're saying, doing, thinking. Also, attraction is a little bit of a flawed mental model. It's a little bit like Newtonian physics, where it works totally to think in terms of motion and forces in many cases, but ultimately it will fail you in some ways when you get deep enough, or when you try to get granular enough. So it's a perfectly good working model, and then ultimately, if you think more in terms of mixing rather than attracting, which is like involves motion and forces, attracting and magnets. I myself talk in terms of magnets sometimes, but more and more I'll be talking in terms of mixing. That's a recent breakthrough, to realize how pervasively you want to think in terms of mixing and not forces. And I'll be developing that for myself more and for you guys more. So need versus want impacts your outcome. Not necessarily. The clarity, what's going to affect your outcome is the clarity of the fruit you're trying to make, and how that affects your foundation that you're building. What impacts your outcome is going to constantly be how well you build your foundation. That might be related to how strongly you want something, might affect the priority. And then if it's more of a priority, you might build the foundation with more focus, more energy, more time, and so forth, which will then impact your outcome. So the stronger you can also get your mind, I talk about this in the when I talk about creative tension and creativity in the 2013 LOI original series. Then you'll see that more of that too, where the more distinctly you can show your brain the difference between how things are and how you want them to be, the more creative tension, the more resources of your brain it will devote towards working on something. That's a little bit different than creativity. The creativity happens in you creating a situation to put your brain in a way to work right. So you do something, it leads to creation. Part of that creation is your mind gets focused as a machine in a particular direction, or devotes more resources as a machine towards something. That may or may not be somewhat vague, but it contains a lot of golden nuggets in there. That, again, all this will be developed. It's all relates to the same type of foundation that I'll be building with you guys. You're welcome, Sean. Thank you for writing that. Just be very careful not to use the incorrect meaning of faith. I'm not saying that you are, but you don't want to like be very careful about the idea of believing what's true. So you see, okay, this is something again I'll plan to talk more about, but here's the thing. It is true that if you assume you're on the right mountain, then that will help you climb it. That's the whole reason why your brain works in the way that it does, trying to get you to believe that you already have the right foundation. There's a use to it, because then you will take more full advantage of that mountain that you're on. But you have to watch it, because your brain's constantly trying to do that and tell you that you're already right and that what you already believe is correct. That is extra helpful when you happen to be right. But if it's your only strategy is to believe that you're already right about stuff, then that strategy will also fail you at times. And it will also cause you, when you're trying to protect a belief as if it's true, but if you don't know it for sure, if you feel like you know it for sure, but if you don't understand how to know it properly, then you're going to need to defend it. And that's going to backfire on you. And that's kind of my quick summary on that for now. Do you think certain events in our lives create cemented boundaries in our mind? The boundaries are unbreakable without some of these deep understandings. People are forever imprisoned in this kind of defense for their defense of their mind, right? People are defensive about being defensive. People are defensive about like core beliefs, about their ability to already be right about how they think and their core method of how they know what's true. People are defensive and that they want to believe they already have that right without even ever thinking about it once in their lives, in essence. You need to break through that in order to get outside of the deepest thoughts that you have. And your very deepest thought is that you're helpless, basically. In order to break through that, you need either my help or to figure out what I figured out on your own. Oh, wow, super. I'm astonished that I made sense there, but at least I made sense to you, Sean. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. I do think I'll make sense over time. What is OMG NHP? Oh, it's just the previous Facebook group. We set up the new project assimilation group, and it's worked out so well that everyone's just fine. Everyone's in a great group. So we'll just keep everyone in their own groups. Yes, absolutely, Nick. Having a strong meta strategy is huge, and it's like with the way meta strategies work is they kind of nest, like one of those, that Russian toy where you pull one apart and you have a smaller one inside the Matryoshka doll. And so you can have like a meta strategy on how to understand technology, or a more specific one on how to understand search engines in general, or generally good at learning, or you have a framework in terms of learning what Greg is talking about. Until you have that framework or meta strategy, then it's more difficult. And then you can have a strategy, you can have meta strategies for staying motivated and so forth. But then, or it's kind of easiest to see with like literature, or at least, sorry, my example, the one that comes to mind. If you kind of understand how to read Shakespeare, which I don't, but if you do, then it'll help you read Shakespeare, and then you might have a greater meta strategy about how to read literature, understand literature, appreciate literature in general. And then there's a deeper thing about maybe how to learn or read, who knows, but they kind of nest. But then ultimately you want to get to the deepest meta strategy and then grow the other meta strategies off of that, or rebuild them off of that. Brian said, remember I talked about imposing organization. This is a while ago. I spent most of my weekend organizing websites, OMG info, email, etc. It was awesome. Great, exactly. When you impose your own organization on things, then that sparks creativity, of course, because you're naturally. Yeah, I actually use this as a little bit of a counterexample, because this is how people usually can quote this when it comes, faith is evidence of things hoped for, or substance of things hoped for, and evidence of things not seen, or different things. But my sense is that isn't good enough. To me, that's a bit vague, to say the least. and it can cause people to to not really try to dig and try to figure out what faith really was. That's kind of my sense of things. I feel like people chunk up too much or are happy with somewhat abstract or not fully understood definitions rather than something that you built. Changing my entire perception of reality. Well, excellent. That's what we're trying to do here. Build it back up again. And remember, it's okay. You can act in your current perception of reality just fine and only use this stuff on a helpful basis. David, what happens when you feel like you need OMG and LOI and without it you would feel helpless and stuck? That's okay for now. We should be around. And what happens is you work on your foundation, you stick with me, and I'll get you weaned off of me. Where you will no longer need me, I'll be irrelevant. Reach out and hug someone. It's funny. Reach out and touch faith. But we need the stuff we need. This is what I'm saying, is what I said earlier, we're building a parallel track. You can't just will yourself to not feel helpless to a certain degree. Also things are relative. Like in order to survive, I need certain things. It's only in letting go of feeling like the world comes to an end if I die. Then if you let go of that, then you don't need that in a certain way in which you feel helpless. I presume that something I'll continue being conscious after my body dies, and that I can go from there. And if I am not, then that's not my problem anymore. But also, it doesn't make sense that God would create the world in the way that God did, and have it be the end all be all of things. It just doesn't. It would have just been made differently otherwise. But that's getting ahead of myself. But just getting a sense of things. Love what you're sharing, David. Great. It's so nice. Clearly this is going over well, and we're making progress here, and we're looks like people are happy to continue, which is the only thing I need from you guys in order to continue helping you. Is I need you to not slam the door in my face. I can't always guarantee to be entertaining or interesting or even be saying something that seems at all relevant to your life, but it looks like we did a good enough job with this that we'll be continuing, and that's all I need from you in order to. I have a lot of understanding I can share with you that's really going to be great as long as you continue with me. I don't have all the answers, but I have some pretty good clarity on some important ones. Oh, thank you, Mike. I didn't realize that was Mike for a second. Okay. I think I mentioned this somewhere. I may not. I think I put this in the webinar schedule page, but this won't exactly be an all questions answered webinar necessarily. But overall, I think we'll get to everything. So that'll be great. So thank you so much, and thank you for all your feedback. This is so fun to be sitting here with the Facebook groups and talking to you guys this way. I didn't bring anyone on, but I think we're good for now. And over time, I certainly well might. Thank you so much, guys. I might have to play the entire song if we're not going to take it next time. We'll see. We'll play it by ear, but it got me in a pretty good state of mind for all this. Thanks, Mike. Absolutely. Yeah, 20 plus years in the making for real. Mike and I have been building up to this for a very long time, working on our foundations, right? We built OMG with the idea that if we want to be transforming the world by spreading good ideas and correct ideas, then might as well get in with internet marketing and figure that out and be around people that are figuring it out and masterminding with it. Literally, that was our actual thinking in getting in this whole niche and all that and building OMG and the stuff before OMG. Literally, we were thinking, might as well be here if we're going to work on changing the world. We don't need gatekeepers anymore. We don't have to get on Oprah or something like that, right? That's wonderful. Thank you, Megan. I appreciate that very much. And hopefully we'll keep building on that. Well, gosh, this is great. This is like a very tasty meal, to put it in Mike's culinary metaphor term. To just add the appreciation, I totally appreciate it. I am appreciated. Thank you, Marianne. Leonard Cohen, huh? I'd have to look that up. I'll look it up after the webinar. You're very welcome. Sorry, I'll give some other people a chance to thank me, I guess. But people are typing stuff in. I don't want to ignore it. Awesome, guys. Um, let's see. I guess that is it. Interested to see how the replay comes out with the old with having the live cam on for the first time. Awesome. Okay, I will be shutting. Oh, there I am. I came back on the screen. Hair's flying away over here. All right. It looks like I'll end the webinar. Good night. More stuff's coming. It's a false alarm. I'll land in a few seconds, but not quite yet. I'm looking forward to it too. It should be wonderful. Thank you, Nat. That's terrific. You're welcome, Mr. O'Brien. Oh, Joseph. It was great talking to you at OMG Live last year. And I'm glad you're here now as well. Sticking around. It's great to have people that are sticking around for years with OMG. It's been a journey, right? I first started talking about law of implication. The first OMG Live would have been about 2.5 years ago now. And the first thing I said was, I'm here to win. And that means, winning for everybody. I'm not here to just make a difference and then ultimately lose. Having said, all right, did good enough. I'm looking to take it all the way. We'll see what happens. I'm the best. All right. I'll show that one to my, cut and paste that for my family. Then they won't have to wonder who the best is after this. Actually, the webinar should be up pretty quick. I presumably have it. It's all recording, yeah, and then they record online these days, so there's no excuse. You like that one? Okay, I'll tell this quick little story. My wife was doing this kind of thing that she learned that you're supposed to do with this memory thing, helping to kind of build not exactly memory, but like processing of more units or stuff, memory processing or something. I'm forgetting the name of it, but she would have these. She would show pictures that she'd taken of different people, like in his family or extended family, or a couple of animals and stuff, and put it face down after he looked at them. And then he'd have to say what the picture was face down from memory. And he was having trouble remembering one. And my wife says to him, he's like 3 years old. She said, "Well, who's the best?" And he goes, "Daddy." His face lit up, and he knew exactly what it was. So there we go. Without even SUNY's proof. At least one of the benefits of having a young child is they think you're the best for a little while. Not sure when that'll go away, but try to keep them brainwashed for as long as possible. All right. All right, let's do this for the next hour. Just sitting with you guys. Terrific. All right. Go. All righty. I am home. I work in my basement. This is my big commute. That's why I have the refrigerator in the background. You probably think I live in a, who knows? But this is not like a, apartment. It's just the basement of my house. It looks a lot more beautiful upstairs. But I enjoy having an easy maintenance place. Alrighty. All right, now I'll end it for real. If I find the right button to do it. I have done this before, but not too often. That's pause. No. Nope. Not that one either. Maybe it's file. Exit. Leave. Exit end webinar. There we go. Alrighty. We're done for real now. Kill this witch, hug the wife, yeah. She actually took Chance out to like a park or something, so he wouldn't be knocking on my door at random times. Okay, guys, seriously, thank you so much. Terrific. So glad to be working on this with you. And we're going to have a great several months. We're really going to work at this, and I'm always looking to win, you know me. So we'll make this, keep poking away at this. And if it takes longer than that, probably go longer anyway. So going to get a lot of people over the threshold here, is what I'm looking to do. Take care, and I will see you next week.